My name is Kiara, and I am 32 years old. I was sitting at the plaintiff table in family court when my mother-in-law, Brenda, stood up and pointed her manicured finger directly at my face. "She is faking it!" Brenda shouted, her voice echoing off the high oak ceiling of the courtroom. "She pulls this sick routine every single time she wants to steal my son's money." Sitting right beside Brenda was Paige. Paige was my white sister-in-law, married to Malik's older brother, DeAndre. Paige leaned over and whispered something into Brenda's ear, causing them both to laugh maliciously. I looked over at my husband, Malik. He did not defend me. Instead, he adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit and smirked. The judge actually seemed convinced by their performance. Then the crushing pain in my chest finally overtook me, and my legs gave out. A man in a military uniform rushed toward me from the back row. "Your Honor, she needs help right now." Seconds later, he yelled to call for an ambulance. Everyone froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden chaos, until the judge stood up in shock. Before I continue my story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been pushed to the absolute edge by the very people who promised to protect you. We were in the middle of a brutal divorce and medical support hearing. I had been suffering from a severe and unexplained heart condition for many months. My medical bills were piling up into the hundreds of thousands, and my health was deteriorating by the day. I was too weak to work my demanding job as a senior corporate risk actuary. I needed financial support from the man I had married, the man whose massive wealth I had secretly helped build. But Malik and his family had a very different plan. They wanted to discard me without a single penny. Brenda marched right up to the wooden partition separating the gallery from the legal tables. She wore an expensive designer dress and a wide-brimmed hat straight from her Sunday church service. As the head of the local church committee, Brenda was obsessed with her social standing in our affluent African-American community. She despised me because I grew up in the projects. She never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that I came from a working-class neighborhood, while her son was a tech finance genius. "Your Honor." Brenda continued, ignoring the bailiff who asked her to sit down. "Look at her. She is just a lazy fraud from the projects trying to extort my successful son. She brings absolutely nothing to the table. She has always brought nothing to the table. Malik is a pillar of this community, and she is dragging his good name through the mud with these fake hospital bills." Paige nodded enthusiastically from the gallery, crossing her arms and glaring at me with utter contempt. The judge banged his wooden gavel loudly, demanding order in the court, but Malik stood up smoothly. He raised his hands in a calm and practiced gesture of submission. He knew exactly how to play the room. Malik was a charismatic startup founder who had recently raised millions of dollars for his financial technology company. He used his immense charm and his prominent church standing as an impenetrable shield against any criticism. He hosted youth outreach programs and charity drives, presenting himself as a selfless savior. "Please excuse my mother, Your Honor," Malik said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "She is just fiercely protective of our family legacy. But she is telling the truth. I built my tech finance company from scratch with my own two hands. I worked day and night to escape the limitations of our past and bring innovation to the financial sector. I refuse to let a woman who refuses to work steal my hard-earned capital for fabricated medical emergencies." He turned his head and looked down at me with eyes so cold they sent a shiver straight through my aching chest. He knew the absolute truth. He knew my heart was failing, but he wanted to win at all costs so he could keep every dime for himself and his secret affairs. Malik took a step closer to my table, leaning forward so the microphone would catch every single word of his cruelty. "She is a parasite, Your Honor," Malik stated clearly. "Always a parasite. Always begging. Always lying." Those words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Always a parasite. Always begging. Always lying. The repetition echoed in my mind, twisting like a jagged knife in my gut. He had used those exact phrases behind closed doors for the last 6 months, systematically breaking down my self-esteem. He isolated me from my friends. He told me I was crazy. He convinced me that my physical weakness was a character flaw. The psychological pain of hearing him broadcast these lies in a court of law was unbearable. I tried to speak to tell the judge that I was a senior actuary, that I had worked incredibly hard for my career before this mystery illness stole my strength. I wanted to scream that I was the one who wrote the original patented algorithm that made his company so successful. I spent countless sleepless nights coding the very foundation of his fortune while he convinced me to let him handle the business side. But my breath hitched. A heavy metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. My vision began to blur at the edges, turning the bright courtroom lights into fuzzy halos. The judge sighed heavily, clearly swayed by Malik's smooth delivery and Brenda's passionate theatrics. The judge looked down at his paperwork and frowned. Miss Kiara, given the lack of conclusive diagnostic evidence from your previous doctors and the compelling testimony regarding your husband's financial contributions, I am inclined to dismiss your claim for emergency medical support. The judge raised his wooden gavel high into the air. The sound of that gavel preparing to strike felt like the final nail in my coffin. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, trying to force air into my lungs. The pain in my chest spiked suddenly, transforming from a dull ache into a blinding and agonizing crush. It felt as if a heavy concrete block had been dropped directly onto my fragile ribcage. I gasped for air, but nothing came. The courtroom spun violently. My fingers slipped from the edge of the table. I crashed hard onto the cold floor. The impact knocked the last bit of breath from my lungs. Above me, I could hear the muffled sounds of the courtroom reacting. I heard Malik laugh, a short and cruel sound. "Nice try, Kiara," Malik sneered, his voice floating above me. "She is acting, Your Honor. She pulls this routine every time she does not get her way. Just step over her." I lay on the floor, paralyzed by pain and unable to defend myself. I thought I was going to die right there on the dirty hardwood floor, while my husband mocked my final moments. Then the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Heavy boots pounded against the floorboards, moving with incredible speed and military precision. A man dressed in a sharp army uniform sprinted down the center aisle. He shoved past Brenda, ignoring her outraged gasp. He completely bypassed Paige, who looked at him in shock. He dropped to his knees right beside me. He was tall, with broad shoulders and intense dark eyes that immediately scanned my face. "Your Honor, she needs help right now," the man barked, his voice commanding absolute authority. He pressed 2 fingers against the side of my neck, checking my erratic pulse. His jaw tightened instantly. "Call for an ambulance right now," he yelled to the bailiff. "This woman is going into massive cardiac distress." Malik stepped forward, his face twisting with arrogant anger. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Malik demanded. "Get away from my wife. She is faking it to get a huge settlement. I am her medical proxy, and I say she is perfectly fine." The man in the uniform stood up, blocking Malik from getting anywhere near me. He reached into his pocket and flashed a shiny medical badge. "I am Major Isaiah Washington," he stated, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. "I am a military cardiologist and a combat veteran here as an expert witness for another trial. And I am telling you right now that your wife is not faking anything." Malik scoffed, taking another aggressive step forward. "You do not know her. I am telling you to back off before I have you thrown out of here." Isaiah did not back down a single inch. He stepped right into Malik's personal space, his perfect military posture towering over my husband's expensive suit. "If you interfere with me providing emergency medical assistance, I will personally see you arrested for attempted manslaughter," Isaiah warned, his voice deadly calm and dangerously low. The judge stood up from his bench, his face pale with sudden shock. "Major Washington," the judge asked hesitantly, "what exactly is happening here?" Isaiah knelt back down beside me, unbuttoning the top collar of my blouse to help me breathe. He shined a small penlight into my eyes, checking my pupil response. He looked up at the judge and delivered a statement that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Your Honor, Isaiah said loudly enough for the court reporter to transcribe every single syllable. This is not a natural heart condition. I have seen these exact symptoms during my combat deployments overseas. The blue discoloration of her nail beds, the specific irregularity of her pulse, and the rapid degradation of her vascular system point to one very specific conclusion. Isaiah turned his head and locked his fierce eyes directly with Malik. Her blood vessels show distinct signs of intentional and slow-drip chemical poisoning. The entire courtroom gasped in unison. Brenda dropped her designer purse, letting it spill across the polished floor. Paige covered her mouth in shock. Malik took a step backward, his arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face. The color drained from his cheeks as the reality of Isaiah's words settled over the room. I lay on the floor struggling to stay conscious, but a tiny spark of hope finally ignited in my chest. For months I had been told I was crazy. For months I had been called a liar and a parasite by the man who was secretly trying to destroy me. But now the absolute truth was out. As the distant wail of ambulance sirens began to echo through the busy city streets, I looked up at Isaiah. He looked back at me and gave a single reassuring nod. The battle for my life and my massive fortune had just begun, and I was no longer fighting alone. The harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit pierced through my heavy eyelids. I tried to blink away the thick fog in my brain, but my entire body felt like it had been submerged in wet concrete. A steady, rhythmic beeping echoed in my ears, matching the frantic pounding in my chest. I realized it was a heart monitor tracking my failing pulse. Every single breath I took sent a sharp, burning sensation deep into my fragile lungs. My mouth tasted like dry chalk and bitter metallic chemicals. I tried to move my fingers to rub my eyes, but my hands were securely taped down to the bed rails and connected to a massive tangle of clear plastic intravenous tubes. The sterile smell of medical bleach made my stomach churn violently. Slowly, the blurry shapes in the cold room began to sharpen and take form. I was not alone. Two figures stood right at the foot of my hospital bed. I forced my heavy eyes to focus on them. It was my husband Malik and his sister-in-law Paige. They were not looking at me with concern or worry or any trace of human empathy. They were whispering to each other in hushed, impatient tones, completely ignoring the fact that I had just collapsed in a courtroom. I watched in absolute horror as Malik reached out and placed his large hand firmly on the lower curve of Paige's spine. His thumbs stroked her back in a slow, intimate circle that made my blood run completely cold. My breath caught sharply in my raw throat. This was not the comforting touch of a brother-in-law. This was the highly practiced touch of a secret lover. Paige leaned her weight back against his hand, perfectly comfortable in his illicit embrace, while I lay paralyzed and dying in a hospital bed mere feet away. Paige sighed loudly and crossed her arms over her incredibly expensive silk blouse. She looked around the intensive care unit with an expression of absolute disgust, wrinkling her nose at the medical equipment. "This place smells incredibly cheap," Paige complained, her voice cutting sharply through the quiet hum of the life support machines. "I cannot believe we have to stand in this filthy public room, Malik. I have a fresh blowout from the salon and the humidity in here is completely ruining my hair." Malik leaned closer to her ear and murmured something soothing and sweet. He did not pull his hand away from her body. He just continued to caress her back right in front of my face. He did not care if I saw them touching. He did not care if I finally understood the horrific truth of their constant secret meetings. My own husband was having a deeply passionate affair with his brother's wife, and they were flaunting their sick romance while I fought for every single breath. Paige finally noticed that my eyes were open and tracking their movements. She did not ask how I was feeling after my collapse. She did not press the call button for a doctor. She simply rolled her eyes and stepped quickly up to the side of my bed. She was holding a thick wooden clipboard tightly against her chest. Without a single word of greeting or comfort, she slammed the heavy clipboard directly onto my aching chest. The sudden violent weight made me gasp in severe pain. "Wake up and pay attention to me," Kiara, Paige ordered, tapping her manicured fingernail aggressively against the top sheet of paper. "We do not have all day to sit around waiting for you to finish your little dramatic performance. We have highly important places to be right now. I looked down at the clipboard resting on my hospital gown. My vision was still swimming slightly, but I could make out the bold legal text printed across the top of the page. It was a property transfer deed. It was the absolute transfer deed to my downtown loft. I had purchased that beautiful brick loft years before I ever met Malik. It was the only piece of real estate entirely in my own name. I had worked 80-hour weeks at the corporate risk firm, living on instant ramen noodles and cheap coffee just to save the massive down payment for that sanctuary. It represented my independence, my grueling hard work, and my ultimate escape from the deep poverty I grew up in. Malik had always hated that loft with a burning passion. He hated that he did not financially control it. He hated that it was a constant physical reminder of my superior financial brilliance. I looked up at Malik, trying desperately to form words with my parched throat. "What is this document?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking and incredibly weak. Malik stepped up beside Paige, dropping his hand from her back, only to smooth his custom silk tie. "It is the immediate solution to the massive financial burden you are currently causing me," Malik stated coldly, staring down his nose at me. "Do you have any idea how much this private intensive care room costs a day? You are aggressively draining my company resources with this fake, mysterious illness. My mother was completely right about you from the very beginning. You are nothing but a desperate leech from the projects trying to secure a bag. You are bleeding me dry, Kiara. You need to sign over the loft deed to me right now so I can liquidate the asset and cover these ridiculous medical expenses." I stared at the man I married in absolute disbelief. He was a multi-millionaire who just closed a massive funding round. My hospital bill was literal pocket change to him. More importantly, my premium medical insurance from my own corporate job covered my entire stay in full. He was blatantly lying to my face. He was using my severe physical vulnerability to steal the very last piece of my independent wealth. Paige checked her diamond watch and sighed heavily, tapping her designer heel against the linoleum floor. "Malik, you need to make her sign it right now," Paige whined, tugging impatiently at his suit jacket sleeve. "The real estate agent is waiting for us at the penthouse across town. If we do not wire the closing funds for our new luxury condo by 3 o'clock, they are going to give the property to another cash buyer. I cannot live in that cramped, depressing townhouse with DeAndre for another week, Malik. I desperately need my new custom kitchen." The devastating truth hit me like a runaway freight train. They were not selling my loft to pay for my medical bills. They were stealing my property to fully fund their secret love nest. Malik was buying Paige a luxury condo right under his own brother's nose, and he was going to use my life savings to do it. "You are buying her a condo," I whispered, staring directly into Malik's dark eyes. "You are stealing my home to buy a house for your brother's wife." Malik did not even blink at the accusation. He leaned his upper body over the metal bed rails, actively invading my personal space. His handsome face was mere inches from mine. His eyes were completely devoid of any human empathy or guilt. "You have zero right to question my financial decisions," Kiara Malik growled, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are a sick, pathetic woman lying uselessly in a hospital bed. You have absolutely no power here. DeAndre is way too stupid to realize what a real sophisticated woman needs, and you are way too weak to be a real wife to a man like me. Paige deserves the absolute best things in life. You are going to sign this paper right now, or I promise you I will make your remaining life a living hell. I will leave you to rot in a cheap public ward. I will tell the entire church congregation that you went completely insane and had to be committed. No one will ever believe a woman from your ghetto background over a man with my flawless community status. Sign the paper, Kiara." The psychological torture was absolutely suffocating. He was tearing down my reality piece by piece, trying to convince me that I was entirely alone and helpless in the world. But beneath the overwhelming physical pain constantly burning in my chest, a tiny spark of pure, unadulterated rage began to glow brightly. I thought of all the late nights I stayed awake writing the complex risk assessment algorithm that actually built his entire tech empire. I thought of all the Sunday dinners where I swallowed my immense pride to politely smile at his elitist mother while she insulted my clothes. I thought of my downtown loft, the exposed brick walls, and the tall glass windows that I painted and cleaned with my own 2 hands. I was not going to let these greedy parasites take my sanctuary. I gathered every single ounce of physical strength left in my trembling body. I lifted my right hand, dragging the heavy pulling intravenous tubes with me. I placed my sweaty palm flat against the cold wooden clipboard, and with a sudden violent push, I shoved the clipboard completely off my chest. It clattered incredibly loudly against the metal bed frame and hit the linoleum floor, scattering the typed legal documents everywhere. I am not signing anything for you. I rasped, my voice trembling, but undeniably defiant. Paige let out a loud, dramatic gasp, taking a huge step back, as if I had physically attacked her. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me. "Look at her!" Malik, Paige shrieked, her voice echoing in the small room. "She is completely out of control. She is violent and totally hysterical. You cannot let her treat us like this when we are trying to help her. We really need that money today to secure the condo." Malik's handsome face instantly contorted into a terrifying mask of absolute fury. The polite, charismatic mask he always wore for the public completely melted away, leaving only a ruthless, greedy monster. He grabbed the metal bed rail so hard his knuckles turned stark white. "You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life," Malik sneered, showing his teeth. "You actually think you can defy me. You think you have any legal rights in this situation. I am your lawful husband. I am your designated medical proxy. I hold your actual life right in the palm of my hand." Malik aggressively turned his back on me and marched straight toward the heavy glass door of the intensive care room. He threw the door wide open and stuck his head out into the busy hospital corridor. "Nurse," he bellowed, his voice demanding and deeply arrogant. "Get in here right this second." A young nurse rushed hastily into the room, looking completely terrified by his sudden angry outburst. She held a digital tablet tightly to her chest, looking nervously between Malik's red face and my beeping monitors. "Is something wrong, sir?" the nurse asked, her voice shaking slightly. "The patient's heart rate is dangerously elevated." Malik pointed a sharp, accusatory finger directly at my face. "My wife is suffering from a severe psychotic break." Malik lied without a single ounce of hesitation or shame. "She is highly violent and completely refusing medical compliance. As her legal husband and documented medical proxy, I am officially revoking my consent for her ongoing treatment. I want you to stop all intravenous medications immediately." The young nurse stared at him in pure horror, her eyes darting to the clear bags of fluid keeping me alive. "Sir, I absolutely cannot do that," the nurse stammered, stepping backward toward the door. "The patient is suffering from acute cardiac distress. Those specific medications are keeping her heart stabilized right now. If I stop the chemical drip, she could go into immediate fatal cardiac arrest." "I do not care what could happen to her," Malik shouted, taking a highly threatening step toward the young woman. "I am the legal proxy. You work for me. She is actively violating my medical directives by attacking my family. I order you to cut the life support drip right now. If you refuse my legal commands, I will personally sue this hospital for millions of dollars, and I will make absolutely sure you lose your nursing license forever. Do it right now." Paige stood safely in the corner of the room, wearing a wicked, highly satisfied smile on her face. She crossed her arms and happily watched me struggle to breathe thoroughly, enjoying the sick spectacle of my impending death. She wanted me completely out of the way so she could have Malik and my hard-earned money all to herself. The young nurse was completely paralyzed with fear. She looked at the complicated machinery attached to my bruised arm, and then looked at Malik's furious, intimidating face. She slowly reached out her trembling hand, hovering nervously over the main control valve of the intravenous pole. Hot tears pooled in my eyes, blurring my vision. I was entirely trapped in this bed. I was going to be quietly murdered in a hospital room by my own husband, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop the nurse from turning the dial. Just as the nurse's shaking fingers brushed the cold plastic dial, the heavy glass doors of the intensive care unit did not just open, they were violently shoved apart. They slammed aggressively against the rubber wall stops with a deafening crack that made everyone jump. A towering figure marched into the room, completely filling the doorway. It was Major Isaiah Washington. He had not left the hospital building after the courtroom collapse. He was still in his full military dress uniform, his broad chest covered in combat ribbons and shining service medals. His dark, intense eyes were blazing with a terrifying protective fury. Behind him stood two massive military police officers wearing dark tactical gear and stern, unyielding expressions. "Step away from that machine right now," Isaiah commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. It was not a polite request. It was a tactical military order that demanded immediate and total obedience. The young nurse snatched her hand back from the pole instantly and scrambled away, pressing her back against the far wall in sheer relief. Malik spun around, his face flushing deep purple with outrage at the interruption. "Who the hell let you in here?" Malik screamed, stepping toward Isaiah and puffing out his chest to look intimidating. "I explicitly told you in the courtroom to stay away from my wife. This is a private medical facility. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here, soldier. I demand that you leave before I call the actual police and have you arrested." Isaiah did not even flinch at the empty threat. He walked slowly and deliberately across the hospital room, completely ignoring Malik's aggressive posturing. He reached inside his perfectly pressed uniform jacket and pulled out a thick sealed document bearing the official blue seal of the United States federal government. He slammed the heavy document down onto the rolling tray table with a massive thud. "This is a federal medical override," Isaiah stated, his deep voice echoing off the sterile walls. "It is signed by a federal judge and fully authorized by the Military Medical Command. Your wife is now a protected ward of an ongoing federal investigation into intentional chemical poisoning. As of this exact second, you are permanently stripped of all proxy rights, all visitation rights, and all legal authority over her medical care." Malik stared blankly at the federal seal on the document, his mouth hanging completely open in utter shock. The toxic arrogance rapidly drained from his body, leaving him looking incredibly small and pathetic. Paige let out a terrified squeak and pressed herself deep into the corner, trying desperately to hide behind a metal medical cart. The two military police officers stepped further into the small room, resting their large hands casually on their utility belts. "I highly suggest you vacate this restricted room immediately, sir," one of the officers said, staring dead at Malik with cold eyes. "Unless you would prefer to be escorted out of this building in handcuffs." Malik looked at me. His eyes filled with a brand new kind of panic. He realized his ultimate control over my life was completely gone. He realized he could not force me to sign the property deed, and he could not force the hospital staff to let me die. He grabbed Paige roughly by the elbow and practically dragged her out of the room, fleeing frantically down the hallway without looking back. Isaiah walked over to the side of my bed. The fierce, terrifying anger in his dark eyes melted away, instantly replaced by a deep, steady warmth. He gently picked up the scattered property deed from the dirty floor and tossed the pages straight into the trash can. He looked down at me, his strong, warm hand resting gently on the metal bedrail. "You are entirely safe now," Kiara, Isaiah said softly, his voice a comforting rumble. "Nobody is going to hurt you ever again. We are getting you out of this dangerous place right now." I looked into his dark eyes and felt my lungs finally draw in a full, deep breath of clean air. I was alive, and I was finally ready to destroy the massive empire I helped build. The heavy steel doors of the restricted military ward sealed shut behind us with a loud and final clack. I was immediately transferred to a secure hospital bed surrounded by state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. Two armed military police officers stood guard directly outside my room. For the first time in over 6 months, I actually felt safe. Isaiah stood at the foot of my bed holding a thick manila folder. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with a fierce and protective respect. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and walked over to my side. He handed me the laboratory toxicology report. I stared at the complex medical terms and the highlighted red numbers, but my brain was still struggling to process the trauma of the afternoon. Isaiah sat down in the chair next to my bed and leaned forward. "You are not crazy, Kiara," Isaiah said, his voice steady and calm. "You are not genetically weak, and you are certainly not suffering from a natural heart failure." He pointed to a specific line on the medical document. "The blood work we expedited through our military lab confirms it. You have been slowly poisoned." The words hung in the quiet air of the sterile room. Poisoned. I repeated the word, tasting the absolute horror of it. Isaiah nodded grimly. "Someone has been exposing you to a highly toxic industrial solvent. It is a tasteless and odorless chemical often used in heavy manufacturing. It is designed to degrade your vascular system over time. It mimics the exact symptoms of severe cardiac disease. They were dosing you slowly, intentionally, methodically. They wanted you weak. They wanted you bedridden. They wanted you to eventually die without raising any suspicion from the authorities." The sheer magnitude of Malik's betrayal washed over me like a freezing ocean wave. He did not just want a divorce. He did not just want to steal my downtown loft for his mistress. He actively wanted me dead. He wanted me erased from the earth so he could fully control the massive fortune we had built. My hands began to shake violently as the reality settled deep into my bones. He poisoned me. My own husband poisoned me. The man who stood before God and my family and promised to protect me was secretly slipping industrial chemicals into my food. He watched me wither away. He watched me struggle to breathe. He watched me cry in agony, and he just smiled. Isaiah reached into a secure evidence bag and placed my personal belongings on the rolling tray table. My phone, my wallet, and my silver laptop. I stared at the sleek computer. Malik and his terrible family thought I was just a sick and useless wife. They constantly mocked my corporate job. They told everyone I was a lazy parasite begging for medical support. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. I was not just a corporate risk actuary. I was a brilliant mathematical architect. I was the silent genius who wrote the core risk assessment algorithm that powered Malik's entire financial technology empire. I built the very foundation of his unearned wealth. I pulled the laptop onto my lap and flipped open the screen. My fingers flew across the keyboard with a muscle memory that had not faded despite my physical weakness. I bypassed the standard login screens and opened a hidden encrypted terminal. Years ago, when I first coded the proprietary software for his startup, I built a secret backdoor into the main server. I never thought I would actually need to use it. I only created it as a failsafe to protect my intellectual property. Now it was my only weapon. I executed a string of complex commands, breaking through Malik's expensive corporate firewalls like they were made of wet paper. I accessed the executive database. I navigated directly to the investor relations folder. I opened his most recent pitch deck. The presentation slides loaded onto my screen in bright high-definition colors. I felt a fresh wave of blinding rage wash over me. I clicked through the documents. There was the core algorithm, my algorithm, the mathematical formula I had spent 4 years perfecting. But my name was completely gone. Malik had systematically erased my identity from every single file. He had replaced my digital signatures with his own. He had forged the federal patent applications listing himself as the sole creator and sole owner of the software. He stole my life's work. He stole my sleepless nights. He stole my brilliant mind to build his fake empire. He presented himself to the world as a tech finance genius, while the real genius was lying in a hospital bed dying from his secret poison. He stole my brain. He stole my future. He stole my legacy. The repetition of his massive theft burned in my chest hotter than any chemical he could have ever fed me. I kept clicking through the stolen documents. I saw emails between Malik and his elite venture capitalist investors. He bragged about his innovative coding skills. He accepted their millions of dollars in funding while sitting at the mahogany desk paid for by my corporate salary. I opened the human resources folder. I saw Paige's employment file. Malik had hired his brother's wife as a senior vice president of operations. He was paying her an exorbitant six-figure salary for a job she was completely unqualified to do. She had no background in finance. She had no background in technology. Her only qualification was her willingness to sleep with her husband's brother and help him abuse his sick wife. The sheer audacity of their arrangement made my blood boil. They were using my stolen algorithm to generate millions of dollars, and they were funneling that money directly into their illicit affair. Isaiah watched my face harden from the side of the bed. He did not interrupt me. He stood there like a silent guardian offering his quiet strength while I processed the ultimate betrayal. I looked up at him. The tears of shock and sadness were completely gone. My vision was crystal clear. They thought they broke me. I told Isaiah, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. They thought they drained every ounce of fight out of my body. They forgot that I am the one who controls the code. I am the one who holds the keys to the kingdom. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my laptop. I did not want to just hack his system. I wanted to completely paralyze his fraudulent world. I opened the master financial terminal. I routed my connection through a series of anonymous international servers to mask my location. I could see every single bank account tied to his corporate entity. I saw the massive deposits from his recent funding rounds. I saw the steady stream of revenue generated by my stolen algorithm. I saw the hidden offshore accounts he had set up in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland to hide his personal wealth from the divorce proceedings. He had millions of dollars stashed away in secret, heavily encrypted vaults. He planned to leave me destitute and homeless while he lived like a king with Paige. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. I did not write a simple lock command. I wrote a highly aggressive algorithmic override script. I targeted the primary routing numbers for every single one of his offshore accounts. I changed the fundamental encryption keys, locking the funds behind a mathematical firewall that only I knew how to breach. I watched the progress bar on my screen race from 0 to 100%. The status of his Cayman Island accounts changed from active to permanently frozen. The status of his Swiss accounts changed from active to permanently frozen. The status of his primary corporate expense accounts changed from active to permanently frozen. I systematically shut off his access to every single dime of his stolen wealth. I severed his financial life support just as aggressively as he had ordered the nurse to sever my medical life support. The profound satisfaction of pressing the enter key and executing the total financial freeze sent a rush of pure adrenaline through my veins. It was the best medicine I could have possibly received. I closed the terminal window and shut the laptop. The silence in the secure military ward was deafening. Isaiah looked at me with a small, impressed smile. "What did you just do?" he asked quietly. I smiled back at him, feeling the power finally return to my physical body. "I just cut off his air supply," I replied. We sat in the quiet ward waiting for the inevitable fallout. Isaiah handed me a small cup of clean, filtered water. I drank it slowly, letting the cool liquid soothe my raw and burning throat. The military doctors had already started administering a specific counteragent through my intravenous line to neutralize the industrial toxins Malik had used against me. I could actually feel the heavy, crushing weight slowly lifting from my chest. My breathing became deeper and much more regular. The horrible metallic taste in my mouth began to fade away. I was reclaiming my physical health at the exact same time I was reclaiming my stolen assets. I looked around the secure room, noting the thick, bulletproof glass on the windows and the reinforced steel frame of the door. Malik and Brenda could never reach me here. Paige could never threaten me with her fake legal documents here. I was protected by the full force of the United States military, courtesy of a stranger who had seen my suffering and decided to intervene. I owed Isaiah my life, but right now I was entirely focused on delivering absolute justice to the people who had tried to end it. Exactly 10 minutes passed. The digital clock on the hospital wall flashed in bright red numbers. Then the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet atmosphere of the room. I looked down at the rolling tray table. The screen of my phone was flashing frantically. The caller identification displayed Malik's name. I looked at Isaiah and nodded. I reached out and picked up the phone. I swiped the screen to answer the call and pressed the speaker button so Isaiah could hear every single word of my husband's impending panic. I did not say a word. I just sat in the hospital bed and listened. Malik screamed through the phone speaker, his voice completely unrecognizable. He was absolutely hysterical. The smooth, arrogant tone he used in the courtroom was entirely gone. He sounded like a frantic, terrified child. Kiara, what the hell is going on? Malik yelled, his breath hitching in a blind panic. Where are you? The hospital said the military transferred you. What did you do to my accounts? I remained perfectly silent, letting his fear echo through the secure room. I am at the most exclusive jewelry boutique in the entire downtown district. Malik continued shouting frantically into the phone. I am standing right in front of the regional manager and 4 other elite customers. I just tried to buy Paige a massive diamond necklace to celebrate our new condo. I handed the clerk my heavy metal black card, the card that has no spending limit, the card tied directly to my offshore holding accounts. And the machine declined it, Kiara. The machine loudly declined my black card in front of everyone. The clerk looked at me like I was a common criminal. He literally took a pair of heavy scissors and cut my black card in half right in front of my face. He told me the bank issued a severe fraud alert and seized the plastic. He told me all my accounts are reporting a 0 available balance. He humiliated me in front of Paige. He humiliated me in front of the entire boutique. I am locked out of the Cayman accounts. I am locked out of the Swiss accounts. I cannot even access the basic corporate expense fund. What did you do to my network, you crazy woman? His voice cracked as the reality of his total financial ruin began to truly sink in. I need you to log into your computer right now and fix this glitch, Malik begged, his anger rapidly transforming into desperate pleading. I have to wire the closing funds for the luxury condo in exactly 1 hour or we lose the property entirely. Paige is crying in the middle of the store. The real estate agent is threatening to cancel the entire contract. You have to undo whatever stupid override you just initiated. You are ruining my life. You are ruining my reputation. Unlock the money right now, Kiara. I listened to his pathetic demands. I listened to the man who had slowly poisoned me, begging for his stolen wealth. I leaned closer to the phone microphone. My voice was calm, cold, and completely devoid of any mercy. You told the judge I was a useless parasite, Malik, I said, slowly enunciating every single word so he would understand the absolute finality of his situation. You told the hospital staff to cut my life support because I was a financial burden. But the truth is, you are nothing without my brilliant mind. You are nothing without my complex algorithm. You are a fake, a fraud, and a thief. I locked the accounts, Malik. I changed the encryption keys. You have absolutely 0 money left. You cannot buy the diamond necklace for your mistress. You cannot buy the luxury condo with my stolen funds. You are completely bankrupt. Enjoy walking out of that jewelry boutique with nothing but your empty pockets and your ruined pride. I reached forward and tapped the red button on the screen, abruptly ending the call and cutting off his frantic screaming. I tossed the phone back onto the tray table. The war had officially escalated, and I had just fired the most devastating first strike. I refused to stay in that sterile hospital bed a single second longer. The military doctors strongly advised against my early discharge, but I signed the release papers with a steady and determined hand. The industrial chemical toxins were still fading from my bloodstream, but the pure adrenaline of taking back my life fueled my every single step. Isaiah walked right beside me as we exited the secure military ward. He did not treat me like a fragile victim. He opened the passenger door of his heavy black tactical vehicle, and we sped off into the busy afternoon traffic. We were heading straight to the primary residence I shared with Malik. It was a massive, sprawling estate in the wealthiest gated community in the city. I had paid the entire down payment for that beautiful house using my corporate risk bonuses. But Malik always acted like he owned every single brick. As Isaiah navigated the winding suburban roads, I stared out the tinted window. My chest still ached with a dull, burning sensation, but my mind was sharper and clearer than ever before. I was no longer the weak, compliant wife they thought they could easily erase. We pulled up to the tall iron gates of the estate. I keyed in my personal digital override code and the heavy gates swung open. Malik's expensive sports car was missing from the wide circular driveway. He was probably still downtown having a total public meltdown over his frozen offshore bank accounts. But Paige's luxury convertible was parked right out front next to Brenda's pristine silver sedan. The absolute audacity of these two women made my blood boil hot. They thought I was either dead or locked away in a public psychiatric ward. They thought the house was completely theirs for the taking. I stepped out of the vehicle and Isaiah followed closely behind me, his posture rigid and highly alert. I marched up the stone steps to the heavy custom mahogany front door. I did not bother reaching into my pocket for my keys. I lifted my heavy boot and kicked the door right below the deadbolt lock. It flew open with a loud cracking sound bouncing aggressively against the interior foyer wall. I stepped into the grand entryway and immediately saw the massive scale of their destruction. The entire first floor was in absolute chaos. Brenda and Paige were standing in the middle of my custom-designed living room, holding thick, black, heavy-duty trash bags. They had completely raided my master bedroom upstairs. My expensive designer dresses, my custom-tailored business suits, and my rare silk blouses were piled on the pristine white carpet like worthless, dirty rags. Paige was actively shoving my limited-edition leather handbags into a trash bag, wrinkling her nose as if my belongings were contaminated. Brenda was holding my velvet jewelry box, ripping my delicate gold chains and diamond earrings from their protective slots, and dumping them directly into her own oversized designer purse. They both froze, completely paralyzed when the front door slammed against the wall. Paige dropped the black trash bag and let out a high-pitched shriek of genuine terror. Brenda spun around so fast she nearly tripped over her own expensive heels. Her jaw dropped open in absolute shock as she stared at me standing in the doorway with Isaiah looming like a protective shadow right behind me. "What are you doing here?" Brenda demanded, her voice cracking with sudden defensive panic. "Malik said you were locked away in the intensive care unit." "Malik says a lot of things," I replied, my voice echoing coldly off the high vaulted ceiling. "But you really should not believe a bankrupt liar. Get out of my house, Brenda. Drop my jewelry and get out right now." Brenda's initial shock rapidly transformed into a vicious, defensive rage. She clutched my velvet jewelry box tightly to her chest, refusing to let it go. She looked me up and down, taking in my pale face and my loose hospital discharge clothes. Her lips curled into a sneer of pure, unadulterated hatred. "This is not your house anymore, Kiara." Brenda spat venomously. "You do not belong here. You have never belonged here. You are nothing but ghetto trash from a pathetic working-class neighborhood polluting our elite family bloodline. I always knew you would drag my brilliant son down into the gutter with you." I just stood there watching the ugly truth finally pour out of her mouth. For years, she had masked her deep prejudice with passive-aggressive church smiles and backhanded compliments. Now she was completely unmasked. Brenda pointed a shaking finger at Paige, who was cowering behind the white leather sofa. "Look at Paige!" Brenda yelled, her voice echoing with elitist pride. "Paige is the kind of refined, elegant woman my son actually deserves. She comes from true wealth. She has an elegant white heritage that brings genuine class to our family name. She understands how high society operates. You are just a stray dog we let into the house out of pity, and now it is time for the stray dog to be put down." The blatant racism and deep internalized prejudice in Brenda's voice was absolutely suffocating. She was standing in the living room I paid for, holding the jewelry I bought with my own hard-earned money, and telling me that her white daughter-in-law was naturally superior simply because of her background. Paige seemed to regain a tiny bit of her confidence hearing Brenda's vicious praise. She stepped out from behind the sofa, crossing her arms and lifting her chin. "Brenda is right, Kiara," Paige sneered. "You are completely out of your league here. Malik and I have been planning this for months. We are moving into a luxury condo together, and we are selling all your tacky clothes to pay for the new custom furniture. You are completely finished. Just go back to the projects where you belong." I did not scream. I did not yell. I did not waste a single breath arguing with two intensely greedy women who were actively stuffing my life into garbage bags. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I walked slowly and deliberately into the center of the living room, crunching my own expensive dresses beneath my boots. Brenda and Paige took a hesitant step backward, intimidated by my absolute silence. Isaiah stood silently by the doorway, blocking their only path of escape. I raised my phone and swiped the screen. Months ago, when Malik started acting paranoid and keeping his office door locked, I quietly installed hidden high-definition security cameras in the living room and the master study. I told myself it was for household security, but deep down, my risk actuary instincts knew I was gathering data on a highly volatile asset. I tapped the screen and connected my phone directly to the massive 90-inch smart television mounted on the stone fireplace wall. The dark screen flickered to life, the audio connected to the surround sound speakers, filling the entire room with crisp, clear noise. Brenda and Paige stared at the television in deep confusion. The video footage showed that exact same living room. It was dated exactly 2 weeks ago. The digital timestamp blinked clearly in the bottom corner of the screen. On the massive television, Paige and Malik were sitting together on the white leather sofa. Paige was straddling Malik's lap, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. They were kissing passionately and aggressively, completely lost in their disgusting secret affair. Brenda gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. She took a stumbling step backward, her eyes wide with total disbelief. She had just praised Paige for being elegant and refined, and now she was watching her golden daughter-in-law carrying on a dirty affair with her other son, right on the living room couch. But the kissing was not even the most devastating part of the hidden footage. I turned up the volume on my phone, letting their voices blast through the expensive speakers. "Malik, we need more cash for the condo deposit." Paige's voice whined loudly through the television speakers. "Kiara's accounts are locked up tighter than we thought." Malik laughed, a cold and cruel sound on the video. "Do not worry about it, baby," Malik replied, stroking her hair. "DeAndre just got his massive annual bonus from the engineering firm. I already forged his signature on a joint investment account. I am going to drain my stupid brother's entire life savings tomorrow and transfer it straight to the condo escrow. DeAndre will not even notice the money is gone until we are already sipping champagne on our new balcony. He is so pathetic and blind, he trusts me with everything." The sheer absolute malice in Malik's voice echoed off the walls. He was not just stealing from me. He was actively destroying his own flesh and blood brother to fund his greedy mistress. Brenda let out a strangled cry of pure horror. The heavy velvet jewelry box slipped from her trembling hands. It crashed onto the marble hearth, sending my gold chains and diamond earrings scattering everywhere. A heavy glass vase on the side table was knocked over by her flailing arm, shattering loudly across the hardwood floor. Brenda's perfect high society illusion was completely destroyed in an instant. Her favorite son was a ruthless thief, and her refined daughter-in-law was a parasite destroying her family from the inside out. Paige fell to her knees, weeping hysterically and begging the television to stop playing. She screamed that it was a fake video, that I had somehow edited the footage to frame her. But the crisp, high-definition evidence was completely undeniable. The room was filled with the deafening sound of Paige's terrified sobbing and Brenda's hyperventilating gasps. Then a cold, mechanical sound cut through the absolute chaos. It was the distinct, heavy click of a metal safety being switched off. Everyone in the living room froze instantly. The front door had silently swung all the way open during the video playback. DeAndre was standing right there in the entryway. His eyes were wide and completely bloodshot. His chest was heaving with erratic, ragged breaths. He had heard every single word of the video. He had watched his own wife plot to steal his entire life savings with his own brother. And DeAndre was holding a loaded handgun, aiming it directly into the room. DeAndre stood completely paralyzed in the grand entryway of the massive estate. The heavy black handgun trembled violently in his right hand. His knuckles were bone white from gripping the cold metal weapon so tightly. His eyes were wide and filled with a devastating mixture of absolute heartbreak and pure murderous rage. He was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps that made his broad shoulders heave up and down. He had just heard every single word of the hidden security footage playing on the massive smart television. He had just watched his own brother and his own wife plotting to steal every single penny he had ever earned in his entire life. The high-definition video was still playing on a loop behind me. Malik and Paige were kissing passionately on the television screen, while the real Paige cowered on the floor in front of the white leather sofa. Brenda let out a series of high-pitched, hysterical sobs. She crawled across the hardwood floor, completely ignoring the shattered glass from the broken vase that was cutting into her expensive designer dress. She reached out her trembling hands toward DeAndre, begging him to put the weapon down. She cried out that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, and that the video had to be a fake creation designed to tear their perfect family apart. She lied right to his face, trying to protect her favorite son from the deadly consequences of his own toxic greed. DeAndre did not even look at his mother weeping on the floor. He kept the dark barrel of the loaded gun pointed directly at Paige. Paige was weeping hysterically and covering her face with her trembling hands. She curled her body into a tight defensive ball on the pristine white carpet. She begged DeAndre to listen to her and swore that Malik had somehow forced her into the illicit affair. She was already rapidly changing her story, trying to paint herself as a helpless victim of Malik's dominant personality. She claimed she never wanted to steal the money and that it was all Malik's evil idea. The sheer volume of her pathetic lies filled the large vaulted living room. I stood perfectly still, watching the entire illusion of their elite high society family crumble into absolute dust. Brenda had just spent the last 10 minutes praising Paige for her elegant white heritage. She had told me that Paige was the kind of refined woman Malik actually deserved because she came from true wealth and genuine class. Brenda possessed a deep internalized prejudice and a burning hatred for my working-class roots. She had always viewed my ghetto background as a disgusting stain on her family name. Now she was forced to watch her supposedly superior daughter-in-law sobbing on the floor after being exposed as a lying, greedy thief who was sleeping with both of her sons. The heavy tension in the living room was suddenly broken by the sound of heavy footsteps storming violently up the front porch steps. Malik had finally arrived from his incredibly humiliating trip to the exclusive downtown jewelry boutique. He was completely unaware of the absolute chaos unfolding inside the house. He shoved his way blindly through the broken front door, bumping aggressively against DeAndre's shoulder without even looking at him. Malik marched straight into the living room, breathing heavily. His expensive, custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, and his silk tie was pulled loose around his neck. His handsome face was twisted into a horrific mask of pure panic and burning anger. He looked at the black trash bags filled with my expensive designer clothes. He looked at his mother, sobbing uncontrollably on the floor amidst the scattered gold and diamond jewelry. He looked at Paige, crying defensively behind the sofa. Then his dark, furious eyes locked directly onto me. He marched straight toward me, completely ignoring Isaiah standing like a protective stone wall by my side. Malik demanded to know exactly what I had done to his offshore holding accounts. He screamed that his limitless black card had been loudly confiscated by the boutique manager. He yelled that the real estate agent had officially canceled the contract for their new luxury condo because the wire transfer had bounced. He blamed me for destroying his entire life and ruining his flawless public reputation. Malik raised his hand high into the air as if he was going to strike me right there in my own living room. He wanted to punish me for daring to fight back against his financial abuse. But before he could even take another aggressive step forward, a cold metallic click echoed sharply through the room. DeAndre had shifted his stance. He was no longer aiming the loaded handgun at his cheating wife. He was aiming the dark barrel directly at Malik's chest. Malik froze in his tracks and finally turned around to notice the deadly weapon pointed at his heart. The angry color drained completely from his face for a tiny fraction of a second, before his toxic arrogance totally took over his brain. He did not cower in fear. He did not drop to his knees and beg his older brother for his life. He did not offer a single apology for sleeping with Paige or trying to steal DeAndre's hard-earned money. Malik actually threw his head back and laughed loudly. It was a cold, empty sound that chilled me to the absolute bone. He looked at the loaded gun and then looked his older brother right in the eyes with profound disgust. Malik told the entire room that he owned DeAndre body and soul. He called his older brother a pathetic, weak loser who did not have the guts to pull the trigger. Malik walked slowly and deliberately toward the barrel of the gun, with his chest puffed out in extreme elitist pride. He reminded his older brother about the crushing bankruptcy from exactly 5 years ago. He proudly announced that he was the only reason DeAndre was not currently sleeping on the dirty city streets. Malik bragged about bailing DeAndre out of his massive financial debts using the tech company funds. He claimed that paying off that bankruptcy meant he officially owned DeAndre's entire life and everything in it. Malik boldly stated that he had bought Paige because DeAndre could never afford to keep a sophisticated woman like her happy. He told his brother that he was just taking back what rightfully belonged to him. He insulted DeAndre's dedicated engineering career, calling him a mindless corporate drone working for a pathetic fraction of what Malik made in a single day. Malik showed absolutely zero remorse for destroying his brother's marriage. He justified the sickening affair by claiming he was the superior alpha male of the family and that he deserved the absolute best of everything. He ordered DeAndre to put the toy gun away before he embarrassed their mother even further. The sheer, unprecedented cruelty of Malik's words pushed DeAndre right over the psychological edge. The older brother's large hands completely stopped shaking. A dead cold calm settled deeply over his tear-stained face. He planted his feet firmly on the hardwood floor and placed his finger tightly on the metal trigger. Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, diving recklessly across the floor in a desperate attempt to shield Malik with her own body. But before DeAndre could apply enough pressure to fire the fatal shot, Isaiah finally moved. Isaiah did not hesitate for a single second. He crossed the large living room with terrifying military speed and absolute precision. It happened so incredibly fast that my eyes could barely track his fluid movements. Isaiah utilized his elite combat training to execute a flawless tactical disarm. He grabbed the top barrel of the handgun, pushing it forcefully upward and away from Malik's chest to ensure the line of fire was completely clear. With his other hand, he delivered a sharp, devastating, non-lethal strike directly to a specific nerve cluster on DeAndre's shoulder. DeAndre gasped loudly in sudden blinding pain. His entire right arm went completely numb and his tight grip on the weapon instantly failed. Isaiah smoothly stripped the handgun from DeAndre's weakened grasp before the older man even realized what was happening. Isaiah swiftly pressed the release button and ejected the loaded magazine, letting it clatter loudly onto the hardwood floor. He pulled back the metal slide and ejected the live round from the chamber, catching the brass bullet neatly in the palm of his hand. He secured the empty weapon firmly in the waistband of his uniform. He gently but forcefully pushed DeAndre backward until the older man collapsed heavily onto a plush velvet armchair. "You are not going to throw your entire life away for these worthless parasites," Isaiah told DeAndre, his deep voice ringing with absolute moral authority. "Do not let their toxic greed turn you into a murderer today." DeAndre buried his face deep in his hands and broke down into loud, agonizing sobs. The immense crushing weight of his broken marriage and his brother's ultimate betrayal had finally broken his gentle spirit. The entire living room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The only sounds were DeAndre's quiet weeping and the faint hum of the television still showing the hidden security footage. Paige slowly stood up from the floor. Her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled and covered in gray dust from the carpet. Her perfect salon blowout was a messy, chaotic tangle around her tear-stained face. She looked at DeAndre sobbing weakly in the chair and knew her comfortable marriage was completely over. She looked at Malik standing frozen in the middle of the room and knew his offshore accounts were permanently locked and the luxury condo was forever out of reach. She looked at Isaiah standing guard with his intimidating military bearing and realized she had absolutely no physical power in this situation. She realized she had no allies left in the room to protect her from the consequences of her actions. The luxurious, carefree life she had carefully plotted to steal was vanishing right before her very eyes. But Paige was a deeply calculating and highly dangerous survivalist. She wiped the fake tears from her cheeks and smoothed the front of her ruined shirt with steady hands. A dark, wicked light entered her eyes. She was losing total control of the narrative, and she was ready to play her final ultimate trump card. Paige stepped directly into the center of the living room, crunching loudly over the broken vase glass and my scattered jewelry. She did not look at her crying husband. She did not look at Brenda trembling on the floor. She glared directly at me with a hatred so pure and toxic, it made the air in the room feel incredibly thick. She placed both of her hands flat against her lower stomach in a highly dramatic and calculated gesture. She smiled a cold, evil smile that sent a terrifying shiver straight down my spine. "I am 3 months pregnant," Kiara Paige announced, her voice ringing clear and steady through the quiet room. "And this baby belongs to Malik." The entire room went completely dead silent once again. Malik's jaw dropped open in genuine shock as he stared at his mistress's stomach. Brenda let out a small, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. I just stared at Paige, refusing to let her see how deeply her vicious words actually stung my heart. I had spent years crying over negative pregnancy tests while my husband was secretly fathering a child with his brother's wife. Paige took a deliberate step closer to me, her eyes locked intensely onto mine. She did not care about the broken family bleeding out around her. She only cared about the massive tech fortune I had just frozen with my algorithm override. Paige pointed a sharp, manicured finger right at my face. "You are going to unlock those corporate accounts right now," Kiara Paige threatened, her voice dropping to a vicious, demanding whisper. "You are going to transfer the closing funds for our luxury condo immediately. If you do not give us exactly what we want right now, I am going to walk straight out that front door and call the police. I am going to call every single media outlet in this entire city. I will look directly into the bright news cameras and I will cry real tears for the reporters. I will tell the entire world that the bitter, jealous wife hired a dangerous, rogue military thug to break into my family house. I will tell them you ordered this violent soldier to physically assault a helpless, pregnant woman. I will swear under oath in a court of law that you tried to brutally murder my unborn child out of pure jealous rage. You will spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal prison, and Malik and I will easily take your entire tech empire anyway. Unlock the offshore accounts right now, or I will completely destroy your life." I stared at Paige as she stood in the center of my ruined living room with her hands resting protectively over her stomach. Her vicious threat hung in the dusty air, heavy and desperate. She actually thought a fabricated media story about a fake assault could force me to unlock federal encryption keys. She thought her lies still held power over my reality. I did not scream at her, and I did not bother to argue. I just smiled, a slow and incredibly cold smile. I told her that the federal authorities already possessed my complete medical toxicology reports, and her pathetic attempt at a public relations smear campaign would not unfreeze a single offshore bank account. I turned my back on her completely. I walked straight out of the broken front door of my own home with Isaiah right beside me, leaving Paige and Malik trapped in their miserable mess with a heartbroken DeAndre and a completely shattered future. 2 days passed in a quiet and steady blur of physical recovery. I rested in a highly secure location provided by Isaiah, while the last lingering traces of the industrial chemical toxins finally flushed out of my bloodstream. Every single hour that passed, I felt my natural strength returning to my limbs. The heavy, crushing weight in my chest evaporated, and my mind became razor sharp. I spent those 48 hours sitting in front of my encrypted laptop, closely monitoring Malik's frantic digital footprints. He was cornered like a desperate rat in a sinking ship. His offshore money was permanently frozen, and his elite venture capitalists were beginning to ask highly aggressive questions. He desperately needed a massive injection of clean, untraceable cash to save his failing tech empire and secure the luxury condo for his pregnant mistress. I watched his digital transactions bounce and fail until he finally turned to the one place he had always used as an impenetrable shield. He turned to our community church. Brenda was hosting the annual Affluent Community Church banquet that Saturday evening. It was undeniably the most exclusive and expensive social event of the entire year for our wealthy neighborhood. The coveted guest list included elite local politicians, famous regional celebrities, and the richest church elders in the entire city. Malik planned to use this highly public emotional event to announce a multi-million-dollar philanthropic fund. It was a classic and deeply cynical manipulation tactic. He wanted to secure his public image as a selfless community savior so he could quietly open a massive private line of credit against the church's wealthy congregation. Brenda knew my physical strength was returning, and she knew I would try to expose their massive web of lies. She hired a private team of armed security guards and stationed them around the perimeter of the venue, specifically instructed to keep me out of the building at all costs. I was not going to hide in the shadows of a secure ward any longer. I dressed for absolute war. I wore a breathtaking floor-length emerald green silk gown that hugged my returning curves and radiated total undeniable confidence. I fastened my favorite diamond drop earrings to my ears, the exact same earrings Brenda had aggressively tried to steal from my jewelry box just 2 days prior. Isaiah escorted me wearing his impeccably pressed military dress uniform, his combat ribbons and service medals shining brilliantly under the city streetlights. We drove to the grand banquet hall in his heavy tactical vehicle. As we approached the venue, we saw the intense security presence at the main velvet ropes. Large men in dark suits were checking names against a strict digital list. But I knew this grand building intimately. I had personally reviewed and approved the architectural blueprints when Malik first donated money to renovate the historic property using my corporate bonuses. I guided Isaiah around the dark brick exterior of the building to the loading docks. We slipped quietly through the heavy metal doors of the bustling catering kitchen. We moved smoothly and purposefully past the frantic, shouting chefs and the busy waitstaff carrying trays of expensive champagne. We walked right through the swinging wooden service doors and emerged directly into the magnificent main ballroom. The vast room was a sea of glittering crystal chandeliers, towering white floral centerpieces, and expensive custom-tailored suits. The air smelled of roasted meats and expensive, heavy perfumes. As Isaiah and I stepped onto the plush burgundy carpet, the cheerful atmosphere in the room subtly and immediately shifted. The polite clinking of expensive crystal glasses slowly faded into a heavy, incredibly uncomfortable silence. Church elders and wealthy donors turned their heads to stare at us. They leaned in close to one another, whispering behind their hands and exchanging deeply concerned looks. Brenda spotted me almost immediately from across the crowded room. Absolute blind panic and raw, visceral fury washed over her heavily powdered face. She dropped her champagne flute onto a passing waiter's tray and rushed straight over to Pastor Thomas, the highly respected head of the congregation. She grabbed his arm and spoke loudly enough for all the surrounding elite guests to hear. She claimed that I had completely lost my mind. She told the pastor that my mysterious, ongoing illness had finally caused a severe psychiatric breakdown. She said I was suffering from violent paranoid delusions and that I desperately needed immediate institutional evaluation. This was exactly how Malik and Brenda had always operated behind closed doors. They expertly used their pristine community reputation and their heavy financial donations to gaslight me. They constantly painted me as the crazy, bitter, and highly unstable wife to isolate me from any potential support system and protect their own malicious secrets. They had spent years convincing the entire congregation that Malik was a long-suffering saint, burdened with a mentally fragile spouse. I did not let her theatrical, desperate lies break my composure for a single second. I held my head high and stood perfectly still in the center of the magnificent room, with Isaiah standing as a strong, silent physical barrier at my side. Malik saw me standing there, and his fake charismatic smile faltered for a tiny fraction of a second. I could see the genuine terror flash behind his dark eyes, but he was far too arrogant to stop his public performance. He adjusted his expensive tuxedo jacket, smoothed his silk tie, and confidently stepped up to the main wooden podium at the front of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone, and the ambient noise in the room fell completely silent. He began his grand emotional speech about the deep importance of community, the virtue of giving back, and the moral duty of supporting the less fortunate. He spoke with fake tears in his eyes about his newly established charitable trust fund, supposedly designed to help vulnerable single mothers and struggling families in the city. He dramatically gestured to the 3 massive high-definition projector screens mounted on the wall directly behind him. He expected a highly produced, emotional promotional video to start playing to secure the massive financial donations of everyone in the room. While he was speaking his empty rehearsed words, I smoothly reached into my designer clutch. I pulled out a small, sleek digital tablet. Malik's corporate technology security was always incredibly sloppy when he thought nobody was smart enough to watch him. I easily accessed the banquet hall's unsecured local audiovisual network. I bypassed the main control booth firewalls in less than 30 seconds, using the backdoor codes I had written myself years ago. Just as Malik raised his hands into the air, expecting the inspirational orchestral music to swell through the speakers, I executed a full system override. I completely hijacked the main projection feed for the entire venue. Instead of Malik's smiling, professionally edited promotional video, the 3 massive screens behind him flickered violently and changed. The bright, colorful images of happy families were instantly replaced by stark black and white federal financial documents. Certified bank statements, international wire transfer logs, and hidden internal corporate ledgers were broadcast in 10-foot-tall letters for the entire congregation to read. I had spent the last 2 days tracking exactly where Malik was desperately trying to pull liquid cash from to save his luxury condo purchase and fund his offshore escape. The heavily detailed documents on the screen clearly and undeniably showed Malik systematically draining the church's own private charity fund. He had been quietly funneling the congregation's generous donation money through a fake corporate shell company and routing it directly into the private escrow account for Paige's new luxury real estate. The exact dollar amounts moving out of the church accounts matched the condo deposit perfectly down to the very last cent. The address of the luxury high-rise was displayed right next to the church routing numbers. A collective breathless gasp of absolute horror ripped through the crowded ballroom. The wealthy philanthropic donors, the devoted church elders, and the respected community leaders stared up at the massive glowing screens in total utter disbelief. The undeniable concrete proof of his sickening theft was burning brightly under the crystal chandeliers for everyone to verify. Malik heard the heavy gasp and turned around to look behind him. He stared up at the screens and saw his massive federal financial crimes illuminated for the whole world to see. He completely froze. The expensive microphone slipped from his trembling hand and crashed loudly onto the wooden stage floor, echoing sharply through the silent room. He looked back out at the crowd, his face draining of all color as he realized his pristine reputation was entirely destroyed. Pastor Thomas stared at the stolen charity funds on the screen and then looked directly at Malik. The pastor's face turned pale with an absolute righteous fury. Without saying a single word to the congregation, the pastor reached slowly into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out his cell phone, and began dialing the police. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom shattered into a million jagged pieces. The wealthy donors and church elders began shouting over one another in absolute panic. They pointed at the massive projection screens, where the undeniable proof of Malik's massive financial crimes glowed brightly under the crystal chandeliers. Women in expensive evening gowns covered their mouths in pure shock. Men in custom-tailored suits rushed toward the front stage demanding immediate answers about their stolen charity contributions. The polished high society atmosphere completely dissolved into raw, chaotic outrage. Malik stood frozen behind the wooden podium, staring out at the angry mob of elite community members he had just tried to rob blind. He realized his flawless public reputation was entirely destroyed in a matter of minutes. Then the sharp, piercing wail of police sirens pierced through the thick, heavy walls of the banquet hall. The loud, aggressive sound rapidly multiplied as multiple police cruisers surrounded the historic building. Flashing red and blue emergency lights washed violently through the tall, arched, stained glass windows, casting eerie, moving shadows across the terrified congregation. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance burst open with a deafening crash. A dozen armed police officers stormed directly into the elegant ballroom. They shouted for everyone to remain calm and demanded immediate order, their booming voices cutting through the hysterical cries of the church elders. Pastor Thomas stood near the front row, pointing a shaking finger directly at Malik on the stage, and told the police officers that a massive federal theft had just been uncovered. Malik watched the armed officers march purposefully down the center aisle. He backed away from the wooden podium, his chest heaving with frantic, panicked breaths. He looked around the room like a terrified, trapped animal searching desperately for any possible escape route. He looked at his mother, Brenda, who was sobbing uncontrollably near the front tables. He looked at Paige, who was staring up at the projection screens in total disbelief. Then Malik's ruthless instinct for self-preservation completely took over his brain. He did not care about family loyalty. He did not care about his illicit romance. He only cared about saving his own skin from federal prison. Malik raised his hand and pointed his finger directly at Paige. "Officers, you need to arrest that woman right now!" Malik shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly across the massive room. He threw his mistress completely under the bus, without a single ounce of hesitation. He spun a complex and highly calculated lie right on the spot. He told the police that Paige was the senior vice president of corporate operations for his technology firm. He claimed she had top-level executive clearance and full unmonitored access to all the corporate shell companies. He lied directly to the police and the entire church congregation, stating that Paige had manipulated the charity accounts behind his back to secretly fund her own lavish lifestyle. He declared that she was a greedy, bitter woman who was actively trying to frame him for her own massive federal crimes because he had recently rejected her obsessive romantic advances. He loudly reminded everyone in the room that Paige had already drained her own husband DeAndre dry and was now parasitically feeding off the church's sacred donations. Paige stood completely paralyzed near the front row of tables. She heard Malik utterly destroy her character and shift the entire blame for the multi-million-dollar theft squarely onto her shoulders. The man who had just promised her a life of unimaginable wealth and a luxury downtown condo was now eagerly handing her over to the police to face decades behind bars. The absolute magnitude of his betrayal hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Paige let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, devastated rage. She realized she had absolutely no allies left in the world. Her husband DeAndre knew she was a cheating thief. Her wealthy lover had just publicly betrayed her to the authorities. The elite community was staring at her with profound disgust. She knew she was going down, and she desperately needed a way to escape the immediate police interrogation. Paige resorted to her ultimate and most toxic manipulation tactic. She let out a loud theatrical wail and grabbed her stomach with both hands. She bent forward at the waist, crying out in fake, agonizing pain. She threw herself heavily onto the plush burgundy church carpet, thrashing around wildly. "Help me!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing tragically through the ballroom. "The stress of this malicious setup is killing my baby," Paige screamed, sobbing hysterically into the carpet. She claimed the unbearable shock of being framed was causing an immediate and fatal miscarriage. She begged for an ambulance and wailed that I was to blame for ruining her life and destroying her unborn child. She put on the performance of a lifetime, trying desperately to turn the angry mob's attention away from the financial crimes and onto her fake medical emergency. Brenda saw her precious white daughter-in-law writhing in apparent agony on the floor. Brenda completely lost her mind. The deep, internalized prejudice and burning hatred she held for me instantly boiled over into physical violence. Brenda lunged forward through the crowd and violently shoved my shoulder. She pushed me incredibly hard against a heavy catering table, sending expensive crystal champagne glasses crashing onto the floor. Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing her shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a vicious murderer!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with insane fury. She screamed that my jealous ghetto rage had just killed her innocent unborn grandchild. She loudly declared to the police and the horrified church elders that I had intentionally orchestrated this entire technological stunt specifically to induce a fatal level of stress upon Paige. Brenda desperately tried to use the wealthy community to gaslight me one final time. She painted me as a violent, unstable monster from the projects who was actively destroying their refined and elegant family. She praised Paige for being a delicate, pure victim of my calculated wrath. Brenda did not care about the millions of dollars stolen from her own church. She only cared about protecting her status and destroying me in front of the elite congregation. She raised her hand to strike me again, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged malice. But Isaiah did not tolerate Brenda's physical aggression for a single second. He stepped smoothly in front of me, his massive frame acting as an impenetrable human shield. He firmly blocked Brenda's swinging arm and shoved her backward with a stern, warning glare that immediately silenced her hysterical screaming. Then his elite military medical training completely took over the situation. A woman was loudly claiming a severe medical emergency on the floor of the ballroom, and the police officers were struggling to control the panicked crowd. Isaiah dropped to his knees right beside Paige on the burgundy carpet. He announced in a booming, authoritative voice that he was a certified military combat doctor. He ordered the crowding church members and the armed police officers to step back and give the patient immediate space to breathe. Paige's fake tear-stained eyes snapped wide open in absolute terror when she saw the military doctor kneeling beside her. She knew she was completely faking the medical crisis to avoid arrest. She knew any basic physical examination would instantly expose her massive lie. She tried frantically to push Isaiah away, thrashing her arms and kicking her legs on the floor. She screamed for him not to touch her, claiming she only wanted a civilian ambulance. She clawed at the carpet, trying desperately to crawl away from his medical assessment. But Isaiah completely ignored her fake protests. He needed to check her core vitals and assess the supposed severe hemorrhaging immediately. Isaiah reached down and gripped the fabric of her incredibly expensive silk blouse. With a single sharp and powerful pull, he ripped the blouse completely open to quickly access her chest and abdomen for a trauma assessment. As Isaiah's experienced hands moved over her stomach, his medical touch instantly registered that something was incredibly wrong. The texture beneath her undershirt was completely unnatural. It did not feel like human flesh or a pregnant abdomen. It felt thick, rigid, and rubbery. He grabbed the firm edge of the unnatural mass protruding from her stomach. He closed his strong grip around it and pulled hard. A massive flesh-colored silicone prosthetic belly pad ripped completely away from Paige's body. The adhesive securing it to her skin tore away with a loud ripping sound. Isaiah held the heavy piece of fake silicone up in the air for a fraction of a second before dropping it directly onto the church carpet. It landed with a dull, heavy thud right next to Paige's perfectly flat stomach. She was not 3 months pregnant. She was not miscarrying a baby. She was not a victim of anything. She was a complete and total fraud who had bought a fake pregnancy belly online to trap a millionaire and blackmail his wife. The entire congregation gasped in a collective breath of absolute horror. The wealthy donors, the armed police officers, and the church elders stood completely frozen, staring down at the fake rubber belly resting on the plush carpet. Brenda's jaw dropped open so far she looked completely broken. Her precious, elegant daughter-in-law had just been exposed as a scheming, manipulative liar who faked a pregnancy to steal millions of dollars. Malik stared down from the wooden stage, his eyes wide with complete and utter disbelief, realizing he had thrown away his entire life and ruined his own brother's marriage for a woman who was faking a baby to secure a bag. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening, as the undeniable truth of their toxic, greedy existence was finally laid bare for the entire world to see. The deafening silence in the grand ballroom lasted for only a few brief seconds, before the entire congregation erupted into absolute and total disgust. The elite wealthy donors, who had just been asked to write massive checks, began shouting in pure outrage. Women in expensive silk evening gowns pointed their manicured fingers at the fake rubber belly resting on the plush burgundy carpet. Respected church elders shook their heads in profound horror as they realized they had been completely manipulated by a family they thought was chosen by God. The polished illusion of the perfect high society family was entirely and permanently destroyed right in front of their very eyes. The polite whispers of the country club elite transformed into a loud, chaotic roar of utter betrayal. People demanded answers about their stolen charity contributions and screamed for the police to take immediate action. Pastor Thomas stood near the front row, clutching his cell phone and watching his most generous donors realize they had been robbed by a ruthless con artist. Brenda kneeled on the floor, staring blankly at the rubber prosthetic belly resting near her expensive shoes. Her hands shook violently as she listened to the vicious shouting of the wealthy women standing above her. She heard them calling her family a disgusting disgrace and a pathetic fraud. She heard them saying that she was a terrible mother who allowed her son to steal from the Holy Community Charity Fund. Brenda realized in that exact terrifying moment that her precious social standing was permanently ruined forever. She would never be invited to another elite gala or host another country club luncheon. She would never sit at the head table of the church council ever again. Her entire existence was tied tightly to her fake public image, and Paige had just completely obliterated it by getting caught in a ridiculous theatrical lie. The crushing weight of her public humiliation pressed down on Brenda until her mind completely snapped. A dark and uncontrollable rage bubbled up deep inside Brenda. She slowly stood up from the carpet and turned her furious eyes toward her weeping daughter-in-law. Paige was still shivering on the floor, wearing her torn, expensive silk blouse and crying pathetic fake tears. Brenda marched directly over to Paige and raised her trembling right hand high into the air. Brenda slapped Paige across the face with such incredible force that the sharp cracking sound echoed loudly over the shouting crowd. Brenda screamed that Paige was a worthless, manipulative parasite who had destroyed her beautiful family and ruined her perfect son. She blamed the younger woman for every single thing that had gone wrong, ignoring her own massive toxic failures. Paige stumbled backward, clutching her red, swollen cheek as the brutal slap stung her skin. The shock on Paige's face instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated violence. Paige was not going to let a ruined older woman physically assault her in front of the entire police force. Paige lunged forward with her arms outstretched and shoved Brenda forcefully with both of her hands. She pushed the older woman backward with tremendous strength born of pure panic. Brenda stumbled awkwardly on her expensive designer high heels, losing her balance completely. Brenda crashed violently backwards into a massive catering table covered in lavish food and expensive crystal dishes. The heavy wooden table collapsed loudly under Brenda's falling weight. Huge silver platters of roasted meats and expensive hot catering dishes crashed down all around her. Crystal champagne flutes shattered into thousands of tiny, sharp pieces across the polished floor. Thick, dark gravy and sweet berry sauces spilled all over Brenda's pristine custom designer dress, completely ruining the expensive fabric. She lay trapped in the disgusting mess of ruined food and broken glass, weeping hysterically as the elite congregation watched her ultimate humiliating downfall. She looked like a pathetic trapped animal rolling in the garbage of her own making. The beautiful white floral centerpieces were crushed beneath her struggling body. the delicious catered feast was turned into a slippery, hazardous swamp of grease and shattered crystal. Brenda gasped for air, trying to wipe the thick, sticky sauces from her powdered face, but her hands were covered in grease and she only smeared the mess deeper into her skin. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the miserable woman crying in the spilled food. I stepped slowly and deliberately through the massive mess. My heavy boots crunched loudly over the shattered crystal glasses and stepped right through the spilled sauces without hesitation. I walked directly up to Brenda and stood tall over her, cornering her against the broken catering table. She looked up at me with absolute terror in her eyes, realizing that her ultimate victim was now holding all the power. I reached into my emerald green designer clutch and pulled out a thick stack of folded medical papers. I held the official hospital toxicology report right in front of her tear-stained, greasy face. The heavy black letters on the crisp white paper detailed every single toxic industrial chemical that the military doctors had aggressively flushed from my dying bloodstream. I stared down into Brenda's terrified eyes and demanded the absolute truth right then and there. I told her that the federal authorities already possessed copies of these exact blood tests. I told her that I knew exactly how the deadly poison got into my system and that her time for lying was completely over. Brenda stared at the medical report, and her entire body began to shake uncontrollably. She looked up at my cold, unyielding face and realized that all of her dark, evil secrets were finally coming to light. She was already completely ruined socially, and now she was facing decades in federal prison for premeditated attempted murder. The intense, crushing pressure of the moment finally broke her completely. Brenda stopped crying, and a sick, twisted sneer spread slowly across her ruined face. She looked up at me from the pile of ruined food and screamed her true feelings for the entire room to hear. She loudly admitted that she was the one who systematically poisoned me for months. She confessed that she had slipped the highly toxic industrial chemicals into my sweet tea every single time I came over for Sunday dinner. She screamed that she would smile warmly to my face and hold my hands in prayer while she watched me drink the deadly poison. She detailed how she carefully measured the toxic doses so that my health would decline slowly and naturally without drawing any immediate suspicion from local doctors. Brenda wanted me to slowly wither away and die a mysterious, tragic death so Malik could play the role of the grieving wealthy widower in front of the church. Brenda yelled that I was nothing but dirty ghetto trash polluting their elite family bloodline. She told the horrified crowd that I did not belong in their high society world and that I needed to be permanently removed so her favorite son could marry a woman with genuine wealth and proper elegant connections. She actually believed that her sick, twisted murder plot was completely justified to protect her family's pristine social status. She felt absolutely zero remorse for trying to end my life. She confessed that she had watched me grow weaker and sicker every single week, and it had secretly brought her absolute immense joy. Her vile words echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the banquet hall. The congregation listened in absolute frozen horror as the beloved church mother confessed to being a cold-blooded sociopathic killer. She had weaponized the sacred tradition of Sunday family dinner to slowly murder her own daughter-in-law. She had used prayer as a shield for her toxic chemical warfare. I listened to her hateful confession and felt a profound sense of closure. I finally had the vocal admission I needed to lock her away forever. I did not need to scream or fight back because her own words had just dug her a permanent, unescapable grave. The armed police officers had seen and heard absolutely everything. They stormed aggressively through the crowd of shocked church elders and grabbed Brenda by her arms. They roughly pulled her out of the spilled food and slammed her forcefully against the wall. The cold metal handcuffs clicked loudly and tightly around her wrists, securing her hands behind her back. Brenda screamed and thrashed violently against the officers, demanding that they unhand her because she was a respected community leader. She wailed that she was better than everyone else and that she did not deserve to be treated like a common criminal. The officers ignored her arrogant protests and read her Miranda rights in a loud, clear voice. Another group of armed officers grabbed Paige from the floor and placed her in handcuffs as well. Paige sobbed hysterically about being framed and begged the police to let her go. She claimed she was just a helpless victim of a rich, powerful family, but the officers simply secured her wrists and pulled her to her feet. The two evil women who had tried to destroy my entire existence were being aggressively marched out of the grand ballroom in absolute public disgrace. The elite donors pulled out their expensive cell phones and recorded every single pathetic second of their humiliating arrests. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers illuminated their ruined faces as they were shoved into the back of the waiting patrol cars. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, watching the police drag my abusers away into the cold night. I finally felt a deep sense of righteous justice settling into my weary bones. The toxic family that had tried to erase me from the world was now entirely dismantled and heading straight to federal prison. I took a deep breath of the cool air rushing in from the open doors. But my hard-earned moment of peace was instantly shattered. I turned around to look for Malik, but the space where he had been standing behind the wooden podium was completely empty. He had used the chaotic distraction of the violent physical fight and the dramatic police arrests to slip silently out the back door of the catering kitchen. He had abandoned his mother and his mistress to face the authorities alone while he scurried away like a coward. I scanned the crowded room, but he was entirely gone. Before I could turn to tell Isaiah to track him down, my encrypted phone began to vibrate violently in my emerald green clutch. It was not a normal notification or a standard text message. It was a piercing, high-pitched mechanical sound that I had personally programmed myself for critical corporate emergencies. I pulled the phone out and stared at the bright red alert flashing rapidly across the dark digital screen. The warning indicator meant that a massive, catastrophic breach was happening at the very core of my technology company. Malik had used his emergency executive access to initiate a hostile board takeover while the police were distracted. He knew his domestic bank accounts were frozen and his public reputation was completely destroyed, so he was bypassing the traditional banking system entirely. He was actively attempting to sell my core artificial intelligence algorithm to an anonymous overseas buyer for a massive amount of untraceable cryptocurrency. The digital progress bar on my screen showed the massive data transfer was already successfully initiated and rapidly downloading. He was planning to steal my entire life's work and permanently flee the country with the digital cash before the federal police could ever track him down. I stared at the red flashing screen as the downloading percentage climbed higher and higher. Malik was making his final, desperate move to ruin me, and he only needed 3 more minutes to disappear completely. I stared at the flashing red screen of my encrypted phone as the downloading percentage climbed higher and higher. Malik was making his final, desperate move to completely ruin me, and he only needed 3 more minutes to disappear forever. I spun around and locked eyes with Isaiah. I told him we had to leave the church immediately because Malik was executing a hostile board takeover right from my own corporate headquarters downtown. Isaiah did not ask a single unnecessary question. He simply nodded his head and moved with that terrifying military precision. We sprinted out of the grand ballroom, leaving the chaotic mess of ruined food and crying women far behind us in the dust. The cool night air hit my face as we rushed down the stone steps toward his heavy black tactical vehicle. My mind was racing a mile a minute, calculating the exact devastating damage Malik could do if he successfully sold my core artificial intelligence algorithm. That proprietary code was the entire foundation of my tech empire. It took me 7 grueling years of late nights and endless sacrifices to write and perfect those intricate mathematical sequences. Malik had never written a single line of code in his entire miserable life, but he had constantly paraded around as the brilliant mind behind the company. If he transferred that data to an anonymous overseas buyer, the buyer would instantly own all of my patents and my entire life work would be gone forever. I jumped into the passenger seat of the tactical vehicle and slammed the heavy armored door shut. Isaiah threw the engine into gear, and the massive vehicle roared to life with a deafening mechanical growl. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and we tore out of the church parking lot, leaving thick black tire marks on the pavement. We merged onto the main city highway, heading straight for the towering downtown skyline. The bright city lights blurred past my window in a continuous streak of neon colors. I kept my eyes glued to the digital progress bar on my phone screen, watching the terrifying transfer percentage inch its way upward. It was sitting at 42% and moving far too rapidly. Malik must have bypassed the secondary security firewalls using the executive override codes he stole from my private office safe. I typed frantically on my glass screen, attempting to initiate a remote server lockdown, but he had already severed my external administrative access. We were speeding down the center lane when two massive black sport utility vehicles suddenly swerved out from the dark highway shadows. They were completely blacked out with heavily tinted windows and reinforced steel grille guards. They matched the exact description of the rogue private security firm Malik had hired to intimidate my loyal board members last year. The first black vehicle accelerated aggressively and slammed hard into the passenger side of our car. The violent impact sent a terrifying shockwave through my entire body. My head whipped sharply to the side and the seatbelt dug deeply into my collarbone. Isaiah gripped the steering wheel with absolute iron control, refusing to let the heavy tactical vehicle veer off the dark asphalt. The second black vehicle merged dangerously close to our rear bumper, attempting to execute a highly aggressive pit maneuver. They wanted to spin us out of control and force us to crash into the concrete median. They were perfectly willing to kill me just to ensure Malik got his massive, untraceable payday. Isaiah checked his rearview mirror, and his jaw clenched in pure, fierce concentration. He told me to hold on tight and brace myself for severe impact. He did not panic or show a single ounce of fear. His elite combat deployments had prepared him for exactly this kind of intense life-or-death situation. He slammed his foot on the brake pedal, forcing the rear vehicle to smash violently into our reinforced steel bumper. The loud, sickening sound of crunching metal echoed loudly over the roaring engines. The rear vehicle lost its forward momentum and swerved wildly into the adjacent lane, nearly rolling over onto its side. But the first black vehicle was still driving aggressively right beside us, attempting to physically crush our doors against the thick concrete highway divider. Sparks flew violently into the dark night sky as the side of our vehicle scraped harshly against the solid concrete wall. The horrible screeching noise of tearing metal was absolutely deafening. Isaiah shifted the heavy gear column and slammed the accelerator all the way down to the floorboard. The powerful engine roared like an angry beast, and we surged forward, breaking free from the crushing metal trap. He swerved flawlessly through the dense late-night traffic, executing incredibly precise, evasive maneuvers that left the pursuing security teams struggling to keep up. The smell of burning rubber and hot engine oil filled the dark cabin of our vehicle. I was gripping the leather door handle so tightly my knuckles were completely white, but I was not screaming or crying. I was staring straight ahead, focusing entirely on the towering glass building approaching in the distance. Isaiah glanced over at me while expertly drifting the heavy vehicle around a sharp highway curve. He looked at my calm, determined face, and his eyes filled with profound, genuine respect. He told me that I was the strongest warrior he had ever met in his entire life. He said he had served with elite combat soldiers overseas, but he had never seen anyone face such endless emotional and physical betrayal with such incredible, unbreakable grace. His deep, steady words hit me right in my absolute core. For over 10 years, Malik had manipulated my mind and deliberately crushed my self-esteem. Malik used to look me right in my eyes and call me a weak, useless ghetto girl who would never survive in the harsh corporate world without his brilliant guidance. Malik had constantly told me I was too fragile and too stupid to handle real pressure. He systematically gaslighted me into believing I was entirely dependent on his protection. But hearing Isaiah, a highly decorated military veteran, validate my true strength completely, shattered every single toxic lie Malik had ever planted in my brain. I felt an incredible surge of pure raw power ignite in my chest. I was not a victim, and I was not weak. I was a brilliant, unstoppable force, and I was going to take back my empire. We flew off the highway exit ramp and raced through the empty downtown streets. The towering glass and steel architecture of my corporate headquarters loomed directly ahead of us, casting a cold blue shadow over the pavement. I checked my phone screen again, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The transfer progress bar was sitting at 81%. We were running entirely out of time. The two black sport utility vehicles had finally caught up to us and were speeding aggressively down the avenue right on our tail. Isaiah told me we did not have the luxury of finding a safe parking spot. He told me to brace myself one more time. The main corporate parking entrance was blocked by a massive heavy steel security barrier. The guard booth was completely empty, because Malik had likely cleared the entire ground floor to ensure he was not interrupted. Isaiah did not even touch the brakes. He accelerated our damaged tactical vehicle and drove it straight into the solid steel security barrier at 50 miles per hour. The violent collision was absolutely explosive. The thick steel gate bent backward and shattered off its heavy concrete hinges. Our vehicle burst right through the flying metal debris, landing heavily on the concrete pavement of the private underground parking garage. The airbags did not deploy, but the harsh impact left my ears ringing loudly. Isaiah kicked his door open and rushed around the hood of the smoking car to pull me out of the passenger seat. The pursuing black vehicles had stopped at the ruined gate, their armed drivers piling out into the street. We did not wait for them to draw their weapons. We sprinted wildly across the dark, echoing parking garage and threw open the heavy metal door to the emergency fire stairwell. The main elevators were definitely disabled by Malik to prevent anyone from reaching the executive floor. We had to climb all the way up to the 20th floor on foot. I reached down and ripped off the bottom half of my expensive emerald green silk gown so I could move without tripping over the heavy fabric. I kicked off my designer high heels, leaving them abandoned on the cold concrete landing. I ran up the stairs in my bare feet, my lungs burning with every single desperate breath. Isaiah stayed right behind me, pushing me forward and watching our backs for any sign of the armed security team. We climbed flight after flight of steep concrete stairs. My leg muscles screamed in total agonizing pain, and my chest felt like it was going to explode. The physical exertion was absolutely brutal, but the blazing, furious adrenaline pumping through my veins refused to let me slow down. We passed the 10th floor, then the 15th. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in the back of my dry throat, but I kept pushing my body beyond its natural absolute limits. I thought about Brenda trying to poison me, and Paige faking a pregnancy, and Malik trying to steal my life. That burning anger fueled my every single step. I was fighting for my survival and my entire life legacy. We finally reached the 20th floor landing. My bare feet were blistered and bleeding from the rough concrete. But I did not care about the physical pain. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy metal stairwell door and shoved it open. We stumbled out onto the pristine carpet of the executive corporate suite. The hallway was completely dark and entirely deserted. We sprinted down the long, silent corridor, heading straight for the massive glass walls of the main executive boardroom. I could see the bright artificial light spilling out from the boardroom doors into the dark hallway. We reached the end of the corridor, and I grabbed the sleek metal handles of the heavy double-glass doors. I pulled backward with all of my remaining strength, but the doors did not budge a single millimeter. They were magnetically locked from the inside. Malik had triggered the emergency lockdown protocol, sealing himself inside the impenetrable glass box. I slammed my bare fists against the thick reinforced glass, demanding that he open the door. Through the thick transparent barrier, I could see Malik sitting frantically at the head of the massive mahogany conference table. His fingers were flying rapidly over the glowing keyboard of his laptop. He looked up and saw me standing on the other side of the glass. A sick, victorious smirk spread slowly across his sweaty, panicked face. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front of the boardroom. I followed his gaze and looked through the glass at the massive 80-inch digital presentation screen mounted on the wall. The bright blue transfer window was glowing ominously in the center of the screen. The large white numbers flashed brightly in the dark room. The international file transfer progress bar was just hitting 95%. The heavy armored tactical vehicle roared down the center lane of the dark city highway. Isaiah kept his large hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the dark side streets and rearview mirrors. We were racing against a digital ticking clock, and every single second felt like a heavy physical weight pressing down on my chest. Suddenly, two massive black sport utility vehicles violently swerved out from an unmarked highway overpass. They were completely blacked out with heavily tinted windows and reinforced steel grille guards welded to their front bumpers. They matched the exact tactical description of the rogue private security firm Malik had secretly hired to intimidate my loyal board members last year. The first black vehicle accelerated aggressively and slammed hard into the passenger side of our car. The violent impact sent a terrifying explosive shockwave through my entire body. My head whipped sharply to the side and the heavy nylon seatbelt dug deeply into my collarbone. Isaiah did not panic or lose control of the heavy vehicle. He drew upon his years of elite combat deployments and executed flawless high-speed evasive maneuvers. He slammed his foot on the brake pedal, forcing the rear pursuing vehicle to smash violently into our reinforced steel bumper. The loud, sickening sound of crunching metal and shattering headlights echoed loudly over the roaring engines. The rear vehicle lost its forward momentum and swerved wildly into the adjacent lane, nearly rolling over onto its side. But the first black vehicle was still driving aggressively right beside us, attempting to physically crush our passenger doors against the thick concrete highway divider. Sparks flew violently into the dark night sky as the side of our vehicle scraped harshly against the solid concrete wall. The horrible screeching noise of tearing metal was absolutely deafening. Isaiah shifted the heavy gear column and slammed the accelerator all the way down to the floorboard. The powerful engine roared like an angry beast, and we surged forward, breaking free from the crushing metal trap. The tires screeched loudly as he swerved flawlessly through the dense late-night traffic, leaving the heavily damaged security team struggling to keep up. The smell of burning rubber and hot engine oil filled the dark cabin of our vehicle. I was gripping the leather door handles so tightly my knuckles were completely white, but I was not screaming or crying. I was staring straight ahead, focusing entirely on the towering glass building approaching in the distance. Isaiah glanced over at me while expertly drifting the heavy vehicle around a sharp highway curve. He looked at my calm, determined face, and his eyes filled with profound, genuine respect. He told me over the roar of the engine that I was the strongest warrior he had ever met in his entire life. He said he had served with elite combat soldiers overseas, but he had never seen anyone face such endless emotional and physical betrayal with such incredible, unbreakable grace. His deep, steady words hit me right in my absolute core. For over 10 years, Malik had manipulated my mind and deliberately crushed my self-esteem. Malik used to look me right in my eyes and call me a weak, useless ghetto girl who would never survive in the harsh corporate world without his brilliant guidance. Malik had constantly told me I was too fragile and too stupid to handle real pressure. He systematically gaslighted me into believing I was entirely dependent on his protection. But hearing Isaiah, a highly decorated military veteran, validate my true strength completely shattered every single toxic lie Malik had ever planted in my brain. I felt an incredible surge of pure, raw power ignite in my chest. I was not a victim and I was not weak. I was a brilliant, unstoppable force, and I was going to take back my empire. We flew off the highway exit ramp and raced through the empty downtown streets. The towering glass and steel architecture of my corporate headquarters loomed directly ahead of us, casting a cold blue shadow over the pavement. I checked my phone screen again, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The transfer progress bar was sitting at 81%. We were running entirely out of time. The two black sport utility vehicles had finally caught up to us and were speeding aggressively down the avenue right on our tail. Isaiah told me we did not have the luxury of finding a safe parking spot or waiting for the security gates to open. He told me to brace myself one more time. The main corporate parking entrance was blocked by a massive heavy steel security barrier. The guard booth was completely empty because Malik had likely cleared the entire ground floor to ensure he was not interrupted. Isaiah did not even touch the brakes. He accelerated our damaged tactical vehicle and drove it straight into the solid steel security barrier at 50 miles per hour. The violent collision was absolutely explosive. The thick steel gate bent backward and shattered off its heavy concrete hinges. Our vehicle burst right through the flying metal debris, landing heavily on the concrete pavement of the private underground parking garage. The airbags did not deploy, but the harsh impact left my ears ringing loudly. Isaiah kicked his door open and rushed around the hood of the smoking car to pull me out of the passenger seat. The pursuing black vehicles had stopped at the ruined gate, their armed drivers piling out into the street. We did not wait for them to draw their weapons. We sprinted wildly across the dark, echoing parking garage and threw open the heavy metal door to the emergency fire stairwell. The main elevators were definitely disabled by Malik to prevent anyone from reaching the executive floor. We had to climb all the way up to the 20th floor on foot. I reached down and ripped off the bottom half of my expensive emerald green silk gown so I could move without tripping over the heavy fabric. I kicked off my designer high heels, leaving them abandoned on the cold concrete landing. I ran up the stairs in my bare feet, my lungs burning with every single desperate breath. Isaiah stayed right behind me, pushing me forward and watching our backs for any sign of the armed security team. We climbed flight after flight of steep concrete stairs. My leg muscles screamed in total agonizing pain and my chest felt like it was going to explode. The physical exertion was absolutely brutal, but the blazing, furious adrenaline pumping through my veins refused to let me slow down. We passed the 10th floor, then the 15th. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in the back of my dry throat, but I kept pushing my body beyond its natural, absolute limits. I thought about Brenda trying to poison me, and Paige faking a pregnancy, and Malik trying to steal my life. That burning anger fueled my every single step. I was fighting for my survival and my entire life legacy. We finally reached the 20th floor landing. My bare feet were blistered and bleeding from the rough concrete, but I did not care about the physical pain. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy metal stairwell door and shoved it open. We stumbled out onto the pristine carpet of the executive corporate suite. The hallway was completely dark and entirely deserted. We sprinted down the long, silent corridor, heading straight for the massive glass walls of the main executive boardroom. I could see the bright artificial light spilling out from the boardroom doors into the dark hallway. We reached the end of the corridor, and I grabbed the sleek metal handles of the heavy double glass doors. I pulled backward with all of my remaining strength, but the doors did not budge a single millimeter. They were magnetically locked from the inside. Malik had triggered the emergency lockdown protocol, sealing himself inside the impenetrable glass box. Through the thick, transparent barrier, I could see Malik sitting frantically at the head of the massive mahogany conference table. His fingers were flying rapidly over the glowing keyboard of his laptop. He looked up and saw me standing on the other side of the glass. A sick, victorious smirk spread slowly across his sweaty, panicked face. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front of the boardroom. I followed his gaze and looked through the glass at the massive 80-inch digital presentation screen mounted on the wall. The bright blue transfer window was glowing ominously in the center of the screen. The large white numbers flashed brightly in the dark room. The International File Transfer Progress bar was just hitting 95%. I slammed my bare fists against the thick reinforced glass again, but it was completely useless. The magnetic seal was heavily fortified and designed to withstand a massive physical assault. Isaiah did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He stepped directly in front of me and pulled me firmly behind his broad shoulders, shielding my body from the heavy glass doors. He reached down to his tactical belt and smoothly drew his heavy military sidearm in one fluid continuous motion. He aimed the dark metal barrel directly at the glowing electronic locking mechanism mounted on the thick steel doorframe. The loud, deafening roar of the gunshot violently shattered the pristine silence of the sterile corporate hallway. The heavy caliber bullet completely decimated the complex electronic keypad, instantly destroying the magnetic current that held the massive doors closed. A sharp, acrid smell of burnt wiring and hot metal instantly filled the cold, air-conditioned corridor. The heavy, reinforced glass doors shuddered violently and burst wide open, swinging inward with a heavy mechanical groan. I did not wait for the smoke to clear. I stepped out from behind Isaiah and marched straight through the shattered doorway, directly into the massive executive boardroom. My bare, blistered feet left faint, bloody footprints across the incredibly expensive plush white corporate carpet. I was bleeding and exhausted, and wearing the torn remains of an emerald green silk gown, but I walked with the absolute terrifying posture of an unstoppable conqueror. The boardroom was freezing cold and bathed in the harsh artificial light of a dozen massive digital monitors. Malik was sitting at the absolute head of the long, polished mahogany conference table. He was surrounded by glowing video feeds of wealthy anonymous foreign investors staring out from the massive wall screens. The elite overseas buyers were watching the hostile takeover happen in real time, completely unaware of the domestic police raids and the absolute chaos happening back at the church. Malik looked away from his laptop screen and stared at me as I marched down the length of the long wooden table. He did not look terrified anymore. The pathetic, sweaty panic that had covered his face just moments ago completely vanished. A sick, twisted, and deeply arrogant laugh erupted from his throat. He laughed out loud, spreading his arms wide open in a grand theatrical gesture of total, absolute victory. He looked right into my eyes and proudly announced to the entire room of foreign investors that I was exactly 30 seconds too late. He pointed his finger at the massive screen where the digital progress bar was slowly ticking up to 96%. He told me there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop the international transfer because the heavy encryption sequence was already fully locked in. Malik leaned back in his expensive leather executive chair and stared at me with pure, unadulterated malice. He decided to use his final moments of perceived victory to completely and utterly destroy my spirit. He wanted to break me down into nothing before he fled the country with millions of dollars. He looked at my bleeding feet and my pale, sick face, and he began to gloat with a horrifying level of detailed cruelty. He told the silent foreign investors exactly how he had built his massive technological fortune entirely on my back. He confessed that he had never possessed a single ounce of genuine artificial intelligence knowledge. He used my brilliant mind. He used my endless dedication. He used my unconditional love. He told me exactly how he stole my proprietary code while I slept. He stole my brilliant mind while I slept. He stole my entire future while I slept. He described how he would wait for me to pass out from sheer physical exhaustion after working 20-hour days. He would quietly slip into my private home office and systematically copy every single line of my complex algorithmic sequences onto encrypted external hard drives. He stole my genius in the dark and proudly paraded it under the bright corporate lights as his own revolutionary invention. Malik laughed again, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed off the cold glass walls. He admitted that he knew exactly what his mother Brenda was doing to me every single Sunday. He knew she was slipping toxic industrial chemicals into my sweet tea. He watched me drink the poison. He watched my health slowly deteriorate. He watched the life drain out of my eyes, and he used my increasing physical weakness as the perfect cover to completely take over the corporate board. He told the investors that I was too sick and too emotionally unstable to run the empire I had created, so he bravely stepped in to save the company. He weaponized my failing health to steal my entire life legacy. He stared at me with cold, dead eyes and told me that I was a pathetic, weak ghetto girl who never deserved to sit in an executive boardroom. He told me that his mother had done him a massive favor by poisoning me because it made his hostile takeover incredibly easy. He told me that I was going to die sick. He told me that I was going to die penniless. He told me that I was going to die completely forgotten while he lived like a king on a private tropical island. I listened to the man I had loved unconditionally, meticulously, detail how he had orchestrated my slow, agonizing murder just to steal my digital creations. I watched the progress bar hit 97%. I watched the foreign investors nodding in silent, greedy approval. I watched Malik smiling with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had won everything. But I did not panic. I did not scream or cry or beg him to stop. The old fragile version of me, the woman who desperately sought the approval of his toxic elite family, was completely and entirely dead. The toxic poison had failed to kill my physical body, but it had successfully murdered my vulnerability. I stood at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, and I looked back at Malik with absolute chilling calm. A slow, dark, and entirely terrifying smile spread across my face. My absolute lack of fear caused a sudden brief flash of confusing panic to flicker across Malik's arrogant eyes. He looked quickly at the progress bar as it ticked to 98%. He did not understand why I was smiling. He did not understand why a woman who was about to lose her entire multi-billion-dollar life work was standing perfectly still and smiling at him. He yelled at me, demanding to know what I was looking at. He told me that the police were too far away and my corporate security clearances were completely revoked. He was 99% finished with his massive international theft, and he thought he was an untouchable technological god. But Malik was not a god. He was just a pathetic parasite who did not actually understand the complex, brilliant code he had spent years stealing from me. He only knew how to copy and paste my files. He never possessed the actual genius required to comprehend the deep internal architecture of my artificial intelligence systems. I slowly reached into my torn emerald green clutch and pulled out my encrypted mobile device. The screen was still flashing with the bright red critical alert. I did not look down at the glass screen as my thumb hovered over the digital keypad. I kept my cold, dead eyes locked entirely on Malik's sweating face. I softly told him that a true creator always protects her creations from mindless, greedy parasites. I told him that I had known he was stealing my files for over 6 months. I had watched his late-night shadows in my office. I had tracked his unauthorized data transfers. I had let him steal the code because I wanted him to dig his own permanent digital grave. I pressed my thumb down on the screen and typed a single highly complex override sequence into my phone. The massive digital presentation screen at the front of the boardroom flashed brightly as the international file transfer finally hit 100%. Malik threw his hands up in the air and let out a loud screaming cheer of ultimate victory. The foreign investors on the video feeds began to clap silently. But Malik's pathetic celebration only lasted for a single devastating fraction of a second. Suddenly, a massive high-pitched alarm began to shriek loudly through the hidden speakers in the boardroom ceiling. All the video feeds of the foreign investors instantly went completely black. Every single computer monitor and digital display in the entire executive suite began to flash violently with massive warning signs in bright burning red. Malik dropped his hands and stared at the screens in pure, unadulterated horror. His mouth hung wide open as the red warning symbols multiplied across every single digital surface in the room. He frantically hammered his fingers against his laptop keyboard, trying desperately to figure out what was happening to his massive payout. He screamed at the blank monitors, demanding that the foreign buyers confirm the cryptocurrency transfer. But there was no transfer. There was no payout. There was absolutely nothing but flashing red warning signs and the sound of total technological destruction. I walked slowly around the long wooden table until I was standing right next to his panicked, trembling body. I looked down at his terrified face and explained exactly what he had just done to himself. I told him that the proprietary code he had so carefully stolen from my private secure servers was never the actual core algorithm. It was a highly sophisticated, completely dormant decoy payload. I had intentionally written a complex localized digital virus and disguised it as my most valuable artificial intelligence sequence. I waited patiently for him to steal it while I slept. I waited for him to upload it to his own secure devices. And I waited for him to initiate a massive global file transfer that would bypass all of the standard corporate safety protocols. The moment the transfer hit 100%, the dormant digital virus fully awakened and aggressively detonated inside the main central server. The virus did not just stop the financial transaction, it rapidly multiplied and systematically sought out every single piece of data connected to Malik's executive clearance profile. Malik stared at his laptop screen as the deep red virus wiped out everything. He watched in absolute frozen terror as his private offshore bank accounts, his hidden shell companies, and his stolen digital assets were completely and permanently eradicated from the global network. He had tried to ruin my life and steal my future, but he had just permanently erased his entire corporate database and his entire stolen fortune with his own greedy hands. The massive video monitors lining the heavy mahogany boardroom walls erupted into total, absolute chaos. The anonymous foreign investors who had been sitting in greedy, silent anticipation just moments ago began screaming at the top of their lungs. Their angry, furious voices echoed through the hidden corporate speakers, filling the freezing air-conditioned suite with a deafening roar of international panic. They realized in a terrifying fraction of a second that they had just wired tens of millions of dollars in untraceable cryptocurrency for a digital payload of completely empty, corrupted files. They pounded their clenched fists on their expensive desks overseas, demanding that Malik reverse the massive transaction immediately. They screamed in multiple different languages that they would hunt him down and ruin him for stealing their money and delivering a localized digital virus that was now actively infecting and destroying their own offshore private servers. The digital infection was spreading through their overseas networks, burning through their illegal financial records and crashing their hidden accounts. Malik could not even formulate a single word to answer them. He just sat frozen in his expensive leather executive chair, staring blankly at the bright red flashing screens as his entire stolen empire burned to digital ash right in front of his very eyes. The arrogant technology god had been completely outsmarted by the woman he thought he had successfully murdered. His hands trembled violently over the useless keyboard as the reality of his massive, catastrophic failure finally began to sink into his greedy mind. Then the soft melodic chime of the private executive elevator echoed down the dark, silent hallway. It was a sound that should have been physically impossible because Malik had completely disabled the main elevator banks from his master's security terminal to prevent anyone from interrupting his massive theft. But the heavy, polished silver doors slid smoothly open anyway. The loud, rhythmic thud of dozens of heavy combat boots hit the pristine corporate carpet. A massive squad of heavily armed Federal Bureau of Investigation agents poured out of the elevator cars and swarmed the entire executive floor with absolute terrifying precision. Their dark tactical vests were clearly marked with bright yellow letters, and their heavy weapons were drawn and ready for immediate action. They moved with flawless military coordination, securing the perimeter and locking down every single exit. They marched straight down the long, shadowed corridor and poured aggressively through the shattered glass doors of the boardroom. The lead federal agent barked loud, aggressive orders demanding that everyone freeze exactly where they were and step far away from the glowing digital terminals. The federal agents were not there by some random stroke of luck or accident. I had secretly submitted a massive encrypted data file to the Federal Cybercrimes Division several hours earlier, right before I walked into the church banquet hall to face Brenda and her fake charity. I had handed the federal authorities a flawless, detailed digital map of Malik's international corporate fraud, his illegal offshore shell companies, and his exact, undeniable digital footprint. They were just waiting in the lobby for him to initiate the final overseas transfer so they could catch him red-handed committing massive, irrefutable federal treason. The armed tactical agents swarmed the long wooden table, immediately cutting off the screaming video feeds of the foreign investors and securing the ruined smoking servers. Two large agents grabbed Malik roughly by the shoulders of his expensive custom-tailored suit and violently yanked him out of his heavy leather chair. The sheer sudden physical force of the federal agents threw him completely off his balance. Malik hit the plush white corporate carpet hard, and his entire arrogant, untouchable facade entirely and permanently shattered into a million pathetic pieces. The wealthy, powerful man who had just stood tall and bragged about slowly poisoning me for my fortune suddenly dropped heavily to his knees like a broken coward. He looked up at me with thick tears streaming rapidly down his sweating, panicked face. His perfect public image was completely gone, replaced by the raw, pathetic terror of a man who knew his life was entirely over. He began to cry hysterically, begging me to call off the federal agents and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. He reached out with his shaking, trembling hands, trying desperately to grab the torn silken edges of my ruined emerald green gown. He used all the old, sweet, affectionate nicknames he used to call me when we first met 10 years ago, trying to manipulate my deep emotions one final time. He promised me over and over again that he could fix this massive financial disaster if I just gave him one more chance to explain himself. He swore with tears pouring from his eyes that he would give me all the stolen money back and that we could start over and build a brand new beautiful technology empire together. He wailed loudly that he was only trying to secure a safe, wealthy future for our family and that he still loved me more than anything else in the entire world. He completely forgot all the vicious, cruel things he had just said to me moments ago when he thought he had won. I did not step back from him. I did not flinch or look away from his pathetic, sobbing face. I just stood tall and perfectly straight on my bare, blistered feet and looked down at the miserable, broken man kneeling on the floor in front of me. The absolute disgust I felt for him was completely cold and entirely permanent. The toxic chemicals his mother had fed me had failed to kill my physical body, but the betrayal had successfully murdered every single ounce of vulnerability and love I ever held for him. I looked deep into his terrified, crying eyes, and I smiled a slow, calm, and completely terrifying smile. I opened my mouth and let my steady voice carry clearly over the loud, aggressive shouting of the securing federal agents. I repeated the exact same vicious, cruel words he had used against me during our first fake courtroom hearing when he thought he had completely destroyed my life. Always a parasite, always begging, always lying. I spoke the words slowly, letting the heavy, devastating truth of that familiar insult sink deep into his ruined mind. I told him that he was absolutely nothing without my brilliant genius, and now he was going to spend the rest of his pathetic, miserable life locked inside a tiny concrete federal cage, thinking about the unstoppable woman he tried to kill. I wanted him to remember this exact moment forever. I wanted him to remember looking up at the woman he called weak and realizing she was the one who orchestrated his ultimate destruction. The federal agents did not give him a single second to respond to my final judgment. They grabbed Malik by his shaking arms and hauled him forcefully to his feet. The cold, heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly and tightly around his wrists, locking his hands securely behind his back. The sharp metallic sound echoed perfectly in the freezing boardroom. He thrashed and kicked wildly against the armed officers, sobbing uncontrollably as they dragged him roughly out of the shattered boardroom. He screamed my name over and over again, begging me to save him from the authorities. But his pathetic, desperate cries grew fainter and fainter as they marched him down the long, dark hallway toward the waiting, secure elevator. The lead federal agent stayed behind for a moment to secure the ruined laptops and the smoking central servers. He looked over at me, and respectfully confirmed that they had collected more than enough digital evidence to lock Malik away for several decades in a maximum security federal prison. His massive financial crimes, his illegal overseas data transfers, and the undeniable physical proof of his domestic corporate fraud were all perfectly preserved in the encrypted files I had voluntarily handed them. The toxic, greedy parasite, who had tried to steal my entire existence and claim my genius as his own, was finally and permanently removed from my world. The authorities had everything they needed to seize all of his remaining assets and dissolve his fraudulent shell companies. The massive executive boardroom was finally quiet, except for the soft mechanical hum of the ruined servers and the flashing red warning lights on the massive wall monitors. I turned to look at Isaiah, who had been standing silently by the shattered glass doors, keeping a watchful, protective eye on the entire chaotic situation from start to finish. I reached my hand deep into the small, hidden silk lining of my torn, emerald green clutch. My fingers wrapped tightly around a small, cold object resting at the very bottom of the bag. I pulled it out and held it up directly into the harsh, bright, artificial light of the corporate suite. It was a tiny silver physical flash drive. I looked at Isaiah and I told him that this tiny piece of metal was the true offline patent algorithm. It was the absolute brilliant core of my artificial intelligence empire and the culmination of 7 years of my relentless hard work. I told him that I had never kept the real proprietary code on the main corporate servers, because I always knew deep down that Malik was searching for a way to steal it from me. I had spent weeks writing a flawless replica code that looked identical to the real algorithm, but was actually a highly destructive digital virus. I had intentionally let him copy that worthless, destructive decoy payload while I kept the real multi-billion-dollar code resting safely in the palm of my own hand the entire time. The technology company was still entirely intact. The valuable patents were still completely mine. I had legally and absolutely reclaimed my entire massive corporate fortune and my personal legacy in one single flawless strategic move. The empire I built was finally completely safe from his greedy, grasping hands. I closed my hand tightly around the small silver flash drive, feeling the heavy, solid weight of my true, unyielding power. I did not need to hide in the dark corporate shadows or seek validation from toxic, greedy people ever again. I looked at Isaiah and I nodded my head, knowing that our brutal long fight was finally completely over. It was finally time to leave this broken place behind and step into the future I actually deserved. We turned around and walked together out of the shattered glass boardroom, leaving the ruined, flashing monitors and the dark, empty hallway far in our wake. We walked slowly down the 20 flights of steep concrete emergency stairs, my bare, blistered feet touching the cold ground, but feeling absolutely no pain whatsoever. The adrenaline and the pure, sweet taste of total victory numbed every single ache in my tired body. We emerged from the dark, damaged underground parking garage and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the early morning. The bright golden sunlight was just beginning to break over the tall city skyline, casting a warm, beautiful yellow glow across the empty, quiet streets. I walked out of the dark corporate building side by side with the strong, loyal man who had fiercely protected me when my own family tried to destroy me. The toxic, manipulative family that had tried to slowly murder me and steal my brilliant mind was entirely and permanently destroyed. Brenda was sitting in a cold local jail cell facing decades in prison for premeditated attempted murder. Paige was locked away facing severe federal charges for massive charity fraud. And Malik was heading straight to a maximum security federal prison, stripped of his stolen wealth, his fake public prestige, and his arrogant pride. The heavy, crushing weight of their endless emotional and physical abuse was finally lifted from my tired shoulders forever. I took a long, deep breath of the fresh morning air, feeling the bright, warm sunlight washing over my face. I was stepping into a brand new, beautiful life. I was immensely wealthy and in total control of my own massive company. I was rapidly regaining my physical health every single day. And for the first time in my entire existence, I was fiercely, deeply, and unconditionally loved. True power is never loud. It is quiet, calculated, and built in the shadows while others underestimate you. When toxic people gaslight you into believing you are weak, they are simply projecting their own insecurities to steal your light. Never let a parasite convince you that you need them to survive. Your brilliance, resilience, and inner strength are your most valuable assets, and no one can ever copy or steal them. By reclaiming your independence and trusting your own genius, you destroy the illusions of those who betrayed you and forge an unbreakable, triumphant future on your own terms. If you have ever had to reclaim your power from someone who tried to dim your light, share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering journeys of ultimate survival and sweet revenge.